Men and women moved quietly through the torchlit halls, half drunk from ale and revelry, half unnerved by the unusual tension that charged the air around them. Servants hurried to and fro, averting their eyes as if they expected at any moment for some unspeakable calamity to shatter the precarious merriment. It was supposed to be a wedding, one of those few moments of unguarded joy in a world that had known too much bloodshed and grief. Yet the sense of unease was unmistakable, as though the stones of the castle themselves were whispering warnings of betrayal. Robb Stark felt it, though he tried to ignore the notion that this was more than just nerves. Beside him, his mother, Lady Catelyn, kept a watchful eye, missing little that transpired around them. They were in the great hall of the twins, a place neither hospitable nor grand, despite the banners and flowers arranged for the occasion. Walder Frey, perched at the head table like a spider in a web, directed the proceedings with his usual mixture of condescension and sharp humor. The old man had seemed in good spirits, which only served to heighten Catelyn's suspicion. She had not trusted him, not from the very first day she set foot in this fortress. But she had agreed to Robb's plan. There was no choice, truly. They needed the alliance to gain passage, to strengthen the king in the North's position in the war. Duty had brought them here, to mend old slights with the Freys and celebrate a union between House Stark and House Frey. Yet that tension, that intangible sense of quiet dread, refused to relent. Long trestle tables were arranged in 2 rows, brimming with roasted meats, fruit pies, loaves of black bread, and overflowing pitchers of wine and ale. The Northmen, though not quite at ease, did their best to indulge in the welcome. They were far from home and tired of battle. The idea of a night of feasting seemed tempting enough that they tried to bury their apprehensions in the dregs of their cups. Some swayed in their seats, well on their way to drunken oblivion. Others, more cautious, sipped from their cups and cast sharp glances around the room, taking note of who stood where, which door was guarded, and how many Frey men circulated behind the scenes. Robb occupied a place of honor with Lady Catelyn on his left and Edmure Tully, the groom, on his right. Edmure's bride, Rosalind Frey, sat with her father at the high table. Now and again, Walder Frey would call attention to some petty remark or jest, and those around him would laugh politely, though the laughter died as quickly as it began. The band was playing a lively tune, and a few couples ventured to dance in the small space cleared near the center of the hall, though their movements felt stiff and uncertain. Somewhere, the howling of wind outside the thick walls suggested a storm was brewing across the river. The twins stood in defiance of many an onslaught, but the atmosphere of a more immediate storm echoed in every breath. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, had been left outside, penned at Walder Frey's insistence. The old man had been insistent that no beast of that size be allowed to roam freely during the celebration. Robb had argued half-heartedly and then relented, but ever since, a niggling worry gnawed at him. Grey Wind's hackles had been up upon entering these walls. He'd growled, eyes narrowed, and refused to settle until forced away. Why did you demand he remain outside? That question looped in Robb's mind, but the answer was always the same. A wolf might frighten the Freys. It was plausible enough, yet it never felt quite right. Between morsels of food, Robb's gaze strayed from face to face. The Freys in attendance bore their usual array of sullen or sly expressions. Walder Frey's brood was large and complex, with alliances and feuds braided into the very heart of the family. Their discontent over perceived slights from House Stark had been placated by Edmure's marriage, or so they claimed. The old lord's mood, surprisingly bright and sarcastic though it was, couldn't mask the flickers of cunning in his eyes whenever he thought no one was looking. The minstrels changed their tune then, taking up a slower, more ominous melody that hovered in the air like a portent. Catelyn's face tightened. She pressed a hand gently on Robb's wrist, the subtlest gesture of caution. He glanced down at her, returning a near imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. He would stay alert. Even if this was indeed a moment of normal wedding nerves, his instincts and hers told him not to let his guard slip. Catelyn motioned to Hallis Mullen, who was standing against a side wall, to have a quiet word. As he stooped to hear her, she spoke in hushed tones. He gave a curt nod, then left the hall discreetly, presumably to check on the men posted outside, or to pay a visit to Grey Wind. Robb watched him go, and wondered if perhaps he was being too paranoid. Hadn't Walder Frey sworn an oath? Hadn't they hammered out the terms that both sides found acceptable? A wedding feast was hardly the place to suspect a vile betrayal, though in Westeros, such things were not unheard of. Still, it all weighed heavily on him, that uneasy sense that a trap was being set. Walder Frey rose from his seat, capturing the attention of the hall. His voice was stronger than one might expect from an ancient man, cutting through the chatter with surprising clarity. "My lords, my ladies," he said, gesturing grandly with a wrinkled hand. "We are most fortunate tonight. Here we have the king in the north, a Tully groom, and my dear daughter Roslyn, who is now Edmure's bride. The gods truly have smiled upon this union, have they not?" His thin mouth curled into something that could pass for a smile, though few would call it warm. Clattering of silverware and an uneasy round of clapping followed. Robb noted that many Freymen had quietly positioned themselves along the perimeter of the hall. Perhaps they were just anxious that someone might cause trouble. Perhaps they didn't trust the Northmen. Or perhaps... He found himself tensing, and a bead of sweat trickled at his temple, despite the chill in the vast chamber. Walder Frey raised his hand again, prompting the minstrels to stop playing. "I have been accused in the past of many things," he went on, sweeping his gaze around the assembled wedding guests. "Pettiness, oversensitivity to slights. But surely tonight, none can say I do not give my daughter away graciously, with the best of the wedding traditions. And as for King Robb, well, I suppose we can bury the hatchet, now that he has seen wisdom in forging this alliance." Robb forced a smile and inclined his head in acknowledgement. From the corner of his eye he saw his mother's brow crease. She leaned closer, whispering, "Too much talk of slights and burying hatchets. He wants all eyes on him. Something is afoot." He managed to maintain his composure, though inside he was battling a sense of rising alarm. Yet Walder Frey carried on, regaling the guests with a predictably long-winded speech. Half brag, half lament, of how poorly he'd been treated over the years. Edmure shifted in his seat, trying not to look bored or uneasy, though he couldn't hide the stiffness in his features. Roslyn kept her eyes lowered. She was trembling slightly, her cup rattling against the table whenever she tried to drink. Robb felt pity for her. She likely had no hand in any treachery. She was just another pawn in this game. The speech ended, and Walder Frey resumed his seat, lifting a cup of wine and a mock toast. "To bride and groom," he said. The hall echoed the toast in unison. Wine sloshed in goblets, and many guests drank deeply. Robb, however, sniffed at his wine before taking only a small sip. He had no desire to dull his senses. Moments stretched on, the band picking up a more raucous tune once again. The tension seemed to ease marginally as people dove back into conversation. Robb tried to focus on Edmure, murmuring words of congratulation, but the words felt stale on his tongue. He could not shake the feeling of 1,000 eyes watching from every dark corner. The hall's torches flickered, making the shadows dance in unsettling ways. Then a scream shattered the moment. It was a piercing cry, abruptly cut short. Instantly, the music ceased. Men jumped to their feet. All eyes darted to the source of the sound. A serving girl lay sprawled near the far doorway. Her tray spilled across the flagstones. Her face was twisted in panic, and standing above her was a Frey guard, his dagger drawn. The room went silent except for the crackling of torches. Time slowed to a surreal crawl. Robb pushed himself up from the table, hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his side. Caitlin rose beside him, eyes wide, terror flickering across her features. The Northmen who were quick enough to react seized hold of their weapons, while others stood baffled, trying to comprehend the unfolding chaos. Walder Frey remained seated, but raised a bony hand. "You clumsy girl," he said in a voice dripping with false menace. "Setting the drinks? Come, get up." But the guard did not relinquish his blade. The old lord's casual remarks only underscored the strangeness of the moment, as though he was trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while the ugliness of real danger seeped in. Then the guard lifted his head, scanning the crowd. His eyes locked on the king in the north. Robb saw a glint there, a predatory gleam. Before anyone could fully process what was happening, a second guard stepped forward near the main doors, crossbow in hand. Another guard appeared on the opposite side with a crossbow as well. Panic flared. Caitlin let out a strangled noise, yanking at Robb's sleeve. Others in the hall shouted and scrambled. "Seize them," came Walder Frey's voice, but in that exact instant, the cunning plan had orchestrated went awry. Grey Wind's fierce growl echoed through the corridor outside. A high-pitched yelp followed as the direwolf attacked whatever men stood guard at the entry. Then, bursting into the hall, Grey Wind bounded forward, eyes blazing, muzzle flecked with blood, and set upon the crossbowmen. The guard barely had time to aim before the giant wolf's jaws clamped on his arm, sending the quarrel clattering against stone. Another Frey soldier lunged, only to be met by the beast's snapping maw. Screams erupted, and now half the wedding guests were fleeing or ducking beneath tables. The music had stopped, replaced by the din of snarls and steel scraping steel. Caitlin, acting on pure reflex, grabbed a dagger from a stunned guard's belt and hurled it at the man aiming a crossbow in Robb's direction. The blade struck him in the neck, his shot flying wide, burying the quarrel in the wood of a nearby pillar. Roars filled the air as Northmen realized they were under attack. Some had already drawn swords, axes, or daggers. The Freys in the hall quickly discovered that their initial advantage, the element of surprise, was crumbling in the face of the Northmen's desperate ferocity. More importantly, Grey Wind's sudden arrival had caused panic among the conspirators who were supposed to seal off the escape routes. Robb's own sword gleamed as he swung it at a Frey, knocking the man's blade aside and shoulder-charging him to the ground. Another rushed in, but the Grey John appeared behind him. A mountainous figure in the riotous confusion, smashing a gauntleted fist into the guard's back. The man collapsed, howling in pain, and the Greychin let out a triumphant bellow that rattled the rafters. Walder Frey, realizing that events were spiraling beyond his control, stood up at the high table. "Kill them, you fools!" he shrieked, pounding a wrinkled fist. Rosalind cowered, covering her head, as Edmure tried to shield her with his body. Men-at-arms flooded into the hall from side entrances, more crossbows at the ready, but the swirling mass of armed Northmen and the dire wolf made it impossible for them to shoot without risking hitting their own men. Robb had no illusions about the dire gravity of the moment. He had to secure an exit. He shouted for his men to rally. The Great John and others answered, forming a circle of steel around Robb and Caitlin. They pushed toward the main doors, only to find them barred. Another squad of Freys stood in their path. One loosed a crossbow bolt that struck an unfortunate Northman in the leg, causing the man to collapse with a choked cry. As more Freys rushed in, Grey Wind took the fight to them. The direwolf's fury was unstoppable, scattering men like a storm scattering dry leaves. Yet there were too many, and crossbow bolts were whizzing through the air. Somewhere in the melee, arrows sliced the air near Walder Frey's table, forcing him to duck behind an upturned bench. A handful of his kin tried to pull him away to safety, but he screeched that he would not leave, not while these traitorous dogs breathed. "I am the Lord of the Crossing," he spat. "I will not slink away in my own hall." Caitlin caught sight of him amid the fray. Her mind reeled with anger. If he wanted them all dead, so be it, but they would not go quietly. She spotted a gap in the frenzied fighting and darted toward it, beckoning Robb to follow. The king in the north cut his way through two Frey soldiers to keep pace, the Great John at his flank. Arrows still hummed overhead. A table crashed somewhere behind them. Wine spilled across the floor, mingling with blood. Another shriek, cut short, and the clang of steel on steel. The acrid smell of terror and gore thickened the air. Bit by bit, the Northmen realized that retreat might be their only chance. More were pouring into the hall from outside, hearing the commotion. Hallis Mullen and his men, stationed near the stables, had managed to fight their way inside. That gave Robb some relief. "We need to rally in the courtyard," Hallis bellowed over the din. "We're trapped in this hall." But then something remarkable happened. Grey Wind lunged at a cowering Frey soldier, forcing the man to scream and drop his crossbow. He tried to scramble away, knocking against the wooden bar that sealed the main door. With a powerful push, the bar was dislodged. It crashed to the ground. Robb didn't waste a second. He shouted for his men to break through. The Great John heaved his shoulder against the door, and it swung open with a groan, letting a gust of cold night air sweep into the chaos. Northmen scrambled to follow Robb into the courtyard, the direwolf bounding ahead. Caitlin kept close, her dagger still gripped tightly. Outside, the courtyard was a swirl of shadows. Several Frey guards stood guard by the stables, some already wounded, others trembling with uncertainty. Clearly, word of the fighting inside had spread, but not in an orderly fashion. The sudden appearance of an armed contingent of Northmen, led by the fearsome direwolf, caused many to lose their nerve. Half of them began to retreat. Some even threw down their weapons, recognizing the futility of continuing Walder Frey's treachery. Those that stayed were quickly overwhelmed by the vengeful Northmen. Robb turned to see if his mother and Edmure were safely outside, but Edmure was still inside, shielding Rosalind. The Great John dashed back to assist, letting out a roar that echoed through the night. Meanwhile, Walder Frey's voice rang out from behind the lines of his men, ordering them to hold, to press the attack, to kill every last Stark loyalist. Crossbow bolts zipped through the open doorway. One grazed Robb's shoulder, tearing his cloak. Grimacing, he pressed a hand to the wound, feeling warm blood seeping through his tunic, though it did not feel deep. He snarled, adrenaline surging. The night was alive with shouts and the clang of swords from within the castle. More of Robb's allies, previously stationed at the stables or the gates, were racing to the great hall. They converged on the courtyard, swords drawn, cries of alarm on their lips. The hold Walder Frey thought he had over the festivities was crumbling in the face of a fiercely determined, Stark retinue. No matter the size of the Frey forces, Walder had counted on catching the Northmen completely by surprise in that enclosed space. But now the plan lay in shambles. Somewhere inside, Walder was bellowing, "Take the bride and groom. Do not let them out." A volley of crossbow bolts flew, but the Northmen returning fire from the courtyard forced the Freys to draw back. A group of Stark men battered their way in, pushing the Freys deeper into the hall. The Great John re-emerged, dragging a stunned Edmure and a trembling Rosalind behind him. Caitlin was at his side, her hair disheveled, face hardened with fury. They managed to stumble out into the courtyard, blinking in the moonlight. Edmure clutched Rosalind protectively, clearly unsure what to believe about her family's betrayal. She wept in silence, her cheeks streaked with tears, caught in the middle of a nightmare. Robb took stock of his immediate surroundings. They needed to gain control of the situation, or at least find a defensible position until sunrise. "Secure the courtyard," he yelled. "Barricade the gates leading into the keep." Hallis Mullen quickly took command of a dozen men, who rushed off to carry out the order. Another group branched off to ensure the stables were clear, and no cavalry charge would take them by surprise. Shouts erupted from the direction of the Great Hall. A knot of Frey men poured out, presumably to retake the courtyard, crossbows at the ready. But before they could close ranks, the Northmen loosed a hail of arrows. Several Freys toppled, and the rest scattered for cover. The Old Lord himself did not appear. Robb guessed Walder might be barricading himself in some hidden chamber or vantage point, or perhaps coordinating from behind his ranks. If nothing else, the ancient weasel had proven cunning and resourceful enough to orchestrate this in the first place. Yet now that the plan had failed to deliver its mortal blow, Walder Frey might be thinking of a swift escape. By increments, the Northmen established a perimeter in the courtyard. The night was cold enough that the breath from men and horses drifted in pale clouds. Gray wind paced restlessly, muzzle slick with blood, ears flattened, ready to rend any foe who dared approach. The men who had survived the initial treachery bore the fury of betrayal, as well as the heartbreak of the wedding turned slaughter. Some had lost friends in that hall. They would not be showing mercy tonight. The Freys trapped in the courtyard had only two options: surrender or fight until death. Several dropped their weapons and knelt, hands raised. The rest tried to flee back inside, only to be cut down. Robb did not savor the violence, but neither could he afford any illusions. A lord who would murder guests under his roof was capable of any cruelty. This was no time to show softness. He needed to make sure Walder Frey's hold was broken. He spoke to Caitlin, voice low but urgent. "We must capture the Lord of the Crossing himself. If we let him escape, He'll rally more men. He'll contact the Lannisters. He must not slip away." Catelyn nodded. Her hand was streaked with blood from the dagger hilt. She gripped Robb's arm. "We go together. The Great John has men to secure the courtyard. Let us root out that treacherous old man." They pressed into the castle's inner corridors. The walls seemed to exhale a stench of old dust and new blood. Shadows flickered under torchlight, revealing spots of fresh carnage. A small group of Freys ambushed them near a narrow archway, but Robb's men swiftly overcame them in a brief but savage contest of steel. Further along, they found a door locked from within. Hallis Malin battered it open with a heavy mace. Inside, crouched behind overturned furniture, were a handful of Walder Frey's sons and grandsons, crossbows trembling in their hands. One of them, a scrawny boy with a tuft of weak whiskers, blanched when he saw the direwolf baring its fangs. In that moment, half of them surrendered on the spot, throwing their weapons aside. The other half tried to fight, and were subdued or slain in a flurry of violence that echoed in the cramped chamber. Catelyn scanned the captives. "Where is Lord Walder?" she demanded, eyes burning with maternal ferocity for all that had been threatened. None answered at first. Then one of the older boys, his face ashen, stammered, He's in the solar, maybe. Or in the upper tower. He has hidden passages." Robb cursed under his breath. "Of course he does." He ordered his men to bind the captives and leave a guard on them. Then he took another handful of men with him up the spiral stair. Each step echoed, and one or two crossbow quarrels whistled past when they encountered pockets of resistance, but the Northmen pressed on steadily. They cleared each landing before moving higher. The gloom of stone corridors and flickering sconces made the keep feel like a labyrinth of threatened ambushes. At one point, they found themselves in a long hallway with arrow slits that looked out over the courtyard. Robb peered down to see the Great John marshalling a defensive ring, ensuring that the Freys who'd surrendered stayed put. Fires from scattered torches and braziers lit the darkness, revealing that more men loyal to Walder Frey had come out of side buildings, only to be swiftly crushed or forced to lay down arms by the furious Northmen. Robb took a measured breath. They were prevailing, but Walder still had loyal guards and hidden routes. Without the old man's capture, the night could drag on in 1,000 small skirmishes. They moved on, wary of each corner. The corridor opened into a dimly lit solar, the door slightly ajar. 2 Frey guards stood outside it. They barely had time to lift their weapons before Robb's men fell on them. One guard was cut down instantly. The other dropped his sword and crumpled to his knees, pleading for mercy. Catelyn coldly gestured for him to be bound and gagged. Then, they stormed into the solar, expecting to find Walder behind a desk or cowering in a corner. Instead, they found only empty chairs, a candle guttering on a side table, and scattered parchments as though he'd left in haste. A window stood open, a chill draft rustling the edges of the documents. Had the old man fled through some secret passage? It was then that a faint noise reached their ears, a scraping sound beyond a panel in the far wall. Hallis Malin stepped forward, running his fingers along the wooden paneling. He pressed on a carved motif, and with a creak, a hidden door swung inward, revealing a cramped passage lit by a single bracketed torch further along. Robb glanced at Catelyn, who nodded resolutely. They advanced into the darkness, the direwolf close at Robb's heel, muzzle twitching as it picked up a scent. The passageway twisted downward, then up a short flight of worn steps, branching once or twice, but Grey Wind never hesitated. Soon, they heard voices, hushed and urgent. Moving quietly, the group rounded a corner to find Walder Frey himself in a small chamber that connected 2 hidden corridors. Beside him stood a handful of guards, one of whom was trying to pry open a latch that presumably led to some escape route. The ancient lord was ranting, voice sharp and quavering. "Hurry, you imbecile, hurry! We'll be at the Lannisters' mercy if we do not." He turned to see Robb Stark, the king in the north, standing at the entrance of the chamber with sword raised. Walder's beady eyes went wide. "You," he hissed. "You? How?" But before he could finish, Grey Wind snarled, stepping forward, teeth bared. One of Walder's guards lunged with a spear, but the direwolf dodged swiftly and clamped onto the man's thigh, sending him crashing to the floor. Another guard, trembling, dropped his weapon and backed away. Walder himself stood rooted to the spot, face contorting with a mixture of terror and rage. Caitlin advanced, her eyes blazing as she spat. "You miserable wretch! You dared break guest right in your own hall!" Walder tried to muster defiance, but it came out in a cracked wheeze. "You brought war to my doors. I only took what was due." His words faltered, overshadowed by the realization that he was cornered and outnumbered. One more guard made a desperate attempt to slash at Robb, but Robb parried smoothly. Grey Wind turned, launching himself upon that guard, and with a short, savage struggle, the man collapsed, screaming. Blood spattered the stone floor. The last of Walder Frey's protectors had either died or thrown down arms. The old man was alone. Robb clenched his sword hilt, chest heaving from the chase and the lingering adrenaline of the night's madness. "Lord Walder Frey," he said, his voice resonating with steel. "I, Robb Stark, King in the North, place you under arrest for the attempted murder of your guests and the breaking of sacred laws." Walder's mouth twitched, and he opened it to spew more vitriol, but the sight of Grey Wind's dripping jaws seemed to sap the venom from his tongue. He lifted trembling hands. "You'll not get away with this," he muttered, though there was little conviction in his voice. "The Lannisters, Tywin." Caitlin cut him off, stepping closer, her features drawn with righteous fury. "Tywin Lannister will do nothing for you here. You are finished." She turned to Robb. "We have him. Let's bind him and bring him before our men." Two of Robb's men set upon Walder, ignoring his curses and feeble thrashing. They bound his wrists tightly. The old man hissed and spat, but he was powerless. The king in the north regarded him with cold eyes, feeling neither triumph nor mercy. It would have been easy to let Grey Wind tear the wretch's throat out, but that was no justice, only vengeance. Better to show the realm what happened to those who would break the oldest laws of hospitality. "Take him to the Great Hall," Robb commanded. "He'll answer for what he's done before all." They retraced their route through the hidden passage, Walder stumbling over the stone steps, cursing all the while. By the time they emerged into the solar, dawn was creeping into the sky, pale light peeking through the window. The night had been one of horror and betrayal, but the Northmen had gained the upper hand. The Freys who still lived had surrendered or were hiding in corners of the vast castle. Robb sent men to flush out any last pockets of resistance, then led the way back to the courtyard, Walder Frey in tow. Outside, the courtyard was littered with the debris of battle, broken weapons, splattered blood, a few corpses. Prisoners huddled under guard, stripped of their arms and awaiting their fate. The Great John stood near the center, overseeing it all with a grim countenance, barking orders to gather the wounded and to separate Frey loyalists from any who had surrendered before the worst of the fighting. Some were children or young men, faces white with shock, unaccustomed to the terrors of real battle. When Walder Frey was dragged forward, a hush fell over the onlookers. Many turned to stare, their expressions mingling satisfaction and anger. Walder was forced to his knees in the middle of the courtyard. Caitlin and Edmure stood beside Robb, while Rosalind Frey hung back, shoulders trembling. She turned her eyes away, too horrified to behold the humiliation of her father. She had known him cruel, but this had surpassed even her darkest imaginings. Robb addressed his men. "We have taken this castle. Walder Frey stands accused of plotting to murder his own guests on a wedding night. He has broken the laws of gods and men." The Great John spat on the ground. "He'll get what's coming to him, your grace." Several Northmen muttered agreement, eyes burning with a thirst for vengeance. Walder tried to speak, but all that came out was a halting croak. In the end, he bowed his head. Whether from exhaustion or acceptance, no one could say. Robb exhaled, aware of how close they had come to dying. Their victory was as much luck as valor. "For now," he said, "well, hold him as a prisoner. Lock him in his own dungeons if need be. The realm will know of his betrayal. Let them see that House Stark remembers." Caitlin brushed a tired hand across her brow. Her eyes were filled with sorrow for the carnage, but also relief at her son's survival. "We should see to the wounded," she said softly. "There are many good men who need tending, ours and theirs, and the dead must be accounted for." Robb looked down at Walder Frey, the old man's body shaking with silent rage or fear. We'll keep him alive. For now. When the time is right, we'll pass sentence. Let him live to face what he's done. Besmartin. He felt no elation, only a weary sense of resolve. The night's gruesome events had altered the course of the war. The Freys could no longer be counted among their allies, that much was certain. Perhaps that had always been so. Walder Frey's grudges and cunning made him a dangerous ally at the best of times. But now, his castle was in stark hands, and the head of House Frey was in chains. The crossing could be held, if they managed it wisely. Or perhaps the Lannisters would come. Robb did not delude himself that the war was won. Many battles were yet to be fought. But for this night, at least, they had survived. Grey Wind ambled closer, nuzzling Robb's hand, seeking reassurance. The direwolf's gray fur was matted with blood, and there was a weariness in the majestic creature's eyes. Robb knelt, pressing his forehead against the wolf's broad skull. "Good boy," he murmured. "You saved us tonight. We all owe you our lives." Around them, the Northmen moved to secure the last corners of the castle. Shouts echoed in the halls as men hammered closed the gates, posted sentries, and carried the wounded to makeshift infirmaries. The great hall, scene of an intended slaughter, would now serve as a place to gather the dead and to tend the severely injured. A grim hush weighed on everyone who walked through its doors. The wedding feast had turned into a battlefield feast, a testament to both Walder Frey's treachery and the fierce spirit of the North. Edmure Tully stood by Rosalind's side, uncertain how to comfort her. She cast broken glances at him, cheeks stained by tears, as if beseeching him to understand that she had no part in her father's sins. Edmure, caught between anger and pity, could only cradle her shoulder in a tentative embrace. He had never asked for this bride, nor had Rosalind asked for this fate, yet they were bound by vows. Duty, tradition, family. Now these had brought them more anguish than either could have imagined. While the prisoners were sorted, and Walder Frey was dragged off to the dungeons, Robb made an inspection of the battered keep. Caitlin went with him, though her steps were heavy. They passed scurrying servants who hadn't known the extent of their lord's treachery, now teetering between terror and relief that a new power had taken over. Many of them avoided eye contact, unsure if the conquerors would exact some penalty upon all who bore the Frey name. Robb did not have the heart to dwell on such vengeance. He was exhausted. Too many good men lay dead or dying. They soon came to a small courtyard just off the main yard, where a handful of servants were tending wounded Northmen. A young soldier, no more than 16, clutched a blood-soaked bandage around his side, wincing at every breath. Caitlin knelt to reassure him, whispering words she might have once offered Bran or Rickon, urging him to hold fast. Another man cradled a limp form in his arms, a friend or brother gone to the gods. Soft sobs broke the silence. For an instant, Robb felt tears rise to his own eyes, the rage momentarily spent, replaced by the raw sorrow of survivors. He had become king in the North to fight for justice, to avenge his father's death at the hands of the Lannisters. Yet in the days since, he had seen how messy, how brutal warfare could be. Victory was rarely clean, and glory was seldom found. Tonight's events proved that monsters lurked in places one least expected. Guessed right, the sacred tradition meant nothing to Walder Frey. But in the end, the old man's cunning had not been enough. He had miscalculated the Northmen's resourcefulness, and above all, he had not counted on the bond between a Stark and his direwolf. Robb placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. She rose, drawing in a steadying breath. "I will help with the wounded," she said quietly. "You must see to it that the crossing is secured, that there's no second wave of Frey vengeance lurking about. And we must find somewhere safe for Edmure and Rosalind to rest." The girl is shaken beyond measure. He nodded, forcing himself to straighten. "I will." In due course, the night fully gave way to a pearly dawn. The early light revealed the damage done: broken gates, battered doors, bloodstains upon the stones. But it also shone on the Northmen, standing guard, exhausted but alive, holding ground that was once denied to them. With the rising of the sun, Men began taking stock of supplies, collecting weapons, counting casualties. They were an army after all, and discipline demanded they maintain their readiness. Even here, Robb walked along the ramparts, gazing out over the waters. The twins spanned the river, still an impressive sight despite everything. He thought of the men who had died during the night, men who had trusted Lord Walder Frey's hospitality. He vowed to see justice done. Let the Frey name forever carry the stain of its patriarch's treason. As he stood there, he also contemplated the road ahead, with Tywin Lannister's forces still a looming threat in the south. But at least they now had the twins, and though it was a bittersweet gain, perhaps it could be turned to the advantage of the north. When he returned to the courtyard, some of his men had begun rounding up the last of the free-ranching Frey soldiers. Many came forward to surrender, preferring captivity to the risk of being hunted down by the enraged victors. Those who laid down arms were herded into a storage barn, where they would be guarded until Robb decided their fate. Family members of Walder Frey, especially the women and children, had locked themselves in various rooms or towers, terrified of the Starks' retaliation. But Robb issued orders that no one was to be harmed unless they tried to take up arms again. It would do no good to slaughter innocents, nor to place that sin on his conscience. Inside the great hall, they began the grim work of sorting the living from the dead. The bodies of Northmen and Freys alike lay strewn among the wreckage of tables and benches. Pools of dry and drying blood had turned the floor slick. Bits of fallen banners and broken crossbow quarrels littered the scene. The minstrels' instruments were abandoned in one corner, some smashed underfoot during the melee. A hush lay heavy on those who walked among the fallen, searching for friends or family. Occasionally, a cry of recognition would break the silence. In such moments, it was easy to forget victory had been achieved here. The weight of loss pressed it down with each step. Robb aided where he could, lifting a broken table aside so that two men could retrieve the body of a fallen comrade. He paused when he spotted the remains of Daisy Mormont, a loyal warrior from Bear Island, her once fierce eyes now clouded in death. A chill ran through him. He muttered a prayer to the old gods under his breath, urging them to welcome her into their halls. Another name? Another good soldier lost on the path to restoring the North's freedom. The hours passed as the cleanup continued, with some men carrying the deceased to a separate wing of the castle that might serve as a temporary morgue. Others rummaged for salvageable supplies from the kitchens, as the night's battle had left stores scattered and half-spoiled. Edmure managed to take Rosalind to a quieter chamber, away from the carnage, where she eventually collapsed into an exhausted sleep. Catelyn moved like a tireless sentinel among the wounded, lending comfort where she could. Near midday, Robb at last allowed himself a moment of rest in a small room off the great hall, where a pitcher of water stood on a table. He poured some into a cup, sipping slowly, letting the numbness of fatigue wash over him. Grey Wind sat at his feet, resting his chin on his paws, though the beast's ears would still swivel at any unexpected noise. Robb felt the dull ache of the slight wound he'd taken in his shoulder. Someone had wrapped it with bandages, though it needed more proper tending than Hyde yet had time for. He rubbed his eyes and thought about the path that had led him here. Ned Stark's execution, the war in the Riverlands, the alliances hastily stitched together. All had come to this point, with Walder Frey's betrayal barely thwarted by a stroke of luck. But it wasn't mere luck, he reminded himself. The Northmen's loyalty, Grey Wind's protection, and Catelyn's vigilance had all played a part. He silently thanked whatever gods might be listening, that they had been warned enough by their own instincts to avoid total disaster. The Red Wedding, as it might have been called had they all been slaughtered, was now an infamous failed plot. Though many good men had still died, at least House Stark endured, and Walder Frey would face judgment. For a moment, Robb wondered if the Lannisters would move swiftly to exploit the chaos at the twins, but he put that thought aside. First, they had to consolidate their hold on this place. Then they had to decide the fate of Walder Frey. Executing him might feel just, and many of his men called for his head on a spike. Yet perhaps a public trial, or a ransom for the families he had wronged, might serve a more strategic purpose. There were alliances to consider, and the old man's wealth could be extracted to pay for the war's mounting costs. He drained the last of the water and stood, ignoring the protest in his tired muscles. Duty called him back to the courtyard, where no doubt Half a dozen urgent matters awaited his decision. He laid a hand on Grey Wind's back. "Come," he said quietly. "We have work to do." Exiting the small room, he re-entered a world turned upside down. The fortress of the twins, once the domain of Walder Frey, was in Stark hands. Men in Stark livery patrolled the walls. Captured Freys huddled in corners. Cookfires had been stoked in the kitchens to provide hot meals for the weary victors. The magnitude of what had happened in a single night felt almost too large to grasp. As Robb stepped into the open air, the faint sun glinted off the waters. A light breeze carried the promise of a new day, for better or worse. He could almost feel the subtle stirring of hope, despite the tragedy that lingered everywhere. The war was far from over. The Lannisters would undoubtedly strike again. But for now, the Red Wedding had failed, and Robb Stark lived. Walder Frey was a prisoner in the dungeons of his own castle, and the North remembered. Perhaps in time, the rest of the realm would remember as well. He took one more look at the men gathered around, many exhausted, many grieving, and he pledged in his heart to lead them to a victory worthy of their sacrifice. It was a pledge steeped in blood and haunted by the ghosts of all they had lost, but it was all he had. And so, with Grey Wind at his side, Robb Stark, king in the North, prepared to face whatever challenges the day would bring, determined to see justice done for the betrayal that was nearly their undoing. Dusk descended on the twins with a quiet heaviness, the pale sky bleeding into a dusky purple as flickering torches lit the ramparts. The wind carried a faint tang of death and smoke, though the worst fires had been contained. The bustle of men trying to reorganize the fortress had begun to slow. Most had found corners to rest, or joined the watch that would guard the gatehouse and the walls through the night. A subdued tension filled the air, for no one could predict whether some last Frey loyalists might attempt a desperate move under cover of darkness. Robb Stark understood that fear, but allowed exhaustion to guide him toward what rest he could snatch. He needed to gather his strength for the tumultuous days ahead. Grey Wind still prowled the corridors, earthen muzzle dripping from water hastily lapped at the stables. He paused whenever passing a cluster of Northmen, sniffing the air for any hint of threat. Most had come to find the direwolf's presence reassuring after witnessing the savage loyalty he'd shown during the betrayal. Yet even among the battered victors, some men could not help but flinch at the sheer size and primal intensity in the beast's eyes. If Grey Wind noticed their wariness, he gave no sign. Robb paused outside a small tower door, pressing a hand to his bandaged shoulder. His men had set aside this chamber for him to rest. Fresh straw lay on a pallet near the hearth, and a narrow window overlooked the courtyard. He was grateful for a bit of solitude, even if he knew it would be fleeting. There were decisions to be made, punishments to mete out, and alliances to recalibrate. In the swirl of exhaustion, he could almost pretend this was some half-forgotten tower in Winterfell. But a quick glance outside showed a castle not his own. The courtyard below remained strewn with the remnants of a savage night, scattered debris, pools of dark-stained earth where men had fallen, watchfires throwing an uneasy glow across stone walls. Too much blood had been shed, and the day had offered little time to clean it all away. Perhaps it never would be fully cleansed. He lingered a moment longer at the window, breathing in the crisp air. It reminded him of the North, of the snows that would soon blanket Winterfell if the rumors of an early winter were true. The thought of home, so distant and uncertain now, sent a pang through him. His father was gone. He had marched south to avenge Ned Stark's death, to protect his sisters, to preserve what was left of his family's honor. The war had dragged him further from home than he could ever have imagined. And now, the Red Wedding that might have ended his life had instead provided him with a fortress. The cost was measured in the bodies that still lay in cold halls. Caitlin found him there in that tower room. She entered quietly, her face lined with fatigue and sorrow. By the flicker of the torch she carried, he saw the faint smudges of blood on her sleeves. Blood not her own, likely from tending wounded men in the infirmary. He offered her a seat on a wooden stool near the meager fire, but she shook her head, standing stiff-backed, as though an unspoken anxiety forbade her from relaxing. He respected that feeling. His own limbs felt half numb from the swirling events, but inside, he was wound tight. "How do they fare?" he asked softly, sensing she'd come with news. She set the torch into a sconce on the wall. "Some cling to life by threads," she replied in a low voice. "We lost more than I feared. Many good men." The Great John counted at least 80 Northmen dead. "Others are gravely wounded, uncertain to survive the night, but the Freys lost more, I think. Hard to say. They're still pulling bodies from the hall. This fortress holds so many corners, some of our men have yet to be found. It's grim work." He nodded, guilt tugging at him. "I should be among them, helping to find the lost." "You need to rest, Robb," she said, though there was a catch in her voice, as if she doubted whether any of them could truly rest. "I fear we may soon have other battles to fight. The Freys had a plan for us. No doubt they had some arrangement with the Lannisters. If Tywin Lannister hears we survived, I expect he'll lash out quickly. He cannot like the idea of us holding the twins." Robb pressed his lips into a firm line, letting the weight of that truth settle. "It's a vantage we need. We'll reinforce these defenses. See that every tower is manned, the river crossing protected. Though I suspect we cannot linger here forever." Catelyn watched him, motherly concern etched into every crease of her face. "And Walder Frey?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "He's in the dungeon, though perhaps your men will want justice swiftly done." Robb breathed out, turning his gaze to the flicker of firelight against stone. "I know," he said quietly. "The men are clamoring to have his head for what he tried to do, and I've thought of it 100 times. But we must be sure we use his downfall wisely. If I kill him outright, half his brood might scatter and raise some fresh terror elsewhere, or find refuge with the Lannisters. He still has alliances in the south, no doubt. I want to break the Freys once and for all, not simply remove their leader." Benry Demtar. His mother closed her eyes for a long moment. "I understand. But the men will want swift justice. After all, the freed. There's a rumor they've taken to calling the Red Feast, or the failed wedding. I've heard a dozen names from men who can't stop talking about the betrayal. They thirst for a punishment that matches the crime." "Dell." He set a hand on the small table near him, noticing how it trembled faintly. "They will have justice," he murmured. "But let me think on how best to deliver it." Their conversation was interrupted by the slow creak of the door. A young soldier in stark colors poked his head in, glancing first at Catelyn, then at Robb. He looked uneasy, as though he brought troubling news. Robb beckoned him forward, noticing how the boy's right arm was in a sling. He had no more than 15 years, still sporting the wide-eyed look of one who had never seen death on such a scale until the previous night. "My lord, your grace," he corrected himself hastily. "The Great John requests your presence in the Great Hall. He says it's urgent, a matter of importance with one of the Frey lords." Robb glanced at his mother, grimacing slightly. "Lead on," he told the boy. "I'll come at once." He took his sword belt from a peg by the door, buckling it around his waist. Even in a conquered castle, he would not go unarmed. By now, the fortress might be close to pacified, but there remained too many unknown corners, too many frightened or bitter souls who might try something desperate. Grey Wind rose to his feet and followed him out, with Catelyn close behind. Their footsteps echoed on the spiral staircase, passing flickering torch after torch until they reached the corridor leading to the Great Hall. The corridor smelled of old blood and the tang of congealed stew left behind in overturned pots. The night's horrors clung to the stones like a miasma. Several Northmen stood guard along the walls, each man looking weary but resolute. They nodded respectfully to their king as he went by. Past the threshold, the Great Hall itself had changed from the carnage-littered scene of the night before. Someone had cleared away broken chairs and tables to the sides, forming a rough open space in the middle. There, in that open space, stood Lord Blackwood, Sir Reynold Westerling, and a small cluster of men with stern faces. The Great John, tall and grim, was near them, and in their midst, surrounded by guards, was Sir Ryman Frey, one of Lord Walder's brood. Blood stained his once fine doublet, and a swollen bruise darkened one side of his face. He glared about him with a mixture of hatred and fear. The Great John turned when he caught sight of Robb, beckoning him over. "Your Grace," he rumbled, voice echoing off the walls. Ser Ryman was found in a hidden passage with 3 crossbowmen. They'd managed to slip out of the initial fight. He claims he wishes to parley. Truth be told, I'd have skewered him the moment he drew breath, but the men insisted we bring him here for you. Ninity. Ser Ryman tried to summon a sneer. "You have no right," he spat, though his wavering tone betrayed his terror. "I came to speak terms to see an end to this bloodshed. We are knights, are we not?" Robb took a slow step forward, studying Ser Ryman. The older man's hair was thinning, his features hawkish, and his eyes darted about as though he feared an attack at any moment. "An end to bloodshed," Robb repeated softly. "That is a sentiment that might have been welcome before last night's treachery. Where was your concern when you were stringing crossbows under the tables? Where was your chivalry when you aimed to slaughter men and women at a wedding feast?" Ser Ryman paled slightly but maintained a veneer of defiance. "That was my Lord Father's will. I followed orders. You think I wanted this war? I served my house as I was sworn to do." Robb felt a tightness coil in his chest. The same old justification from every soldier, every knight who had ever deflected blame onto their overlord. He glanced at the Great John, who seemed ready to snap Ryman's neck at a word. "If you truly came to talk," Robb said, "then talk. But know that House Frey's crimes cannot be washed away with a few honeyed words." Ser Ryman licked his lips nervously, gaze flickering from Robb's sword to gray wind. "As I said, I only want to see a resolution. We have wounded men, frightened women, children. They need food, water, mercy. Lord Walder may be in your dungeon, but House Frey still belongs here. We can help you keep order. We can help you keep order." A snarl from Grey Wind cut him off, the direwolf's hackles rising. Ser Ryman flinched back as if confronted by a demon. The Great John let out a coarse laugh. "A fine jest. You'd help us keep order in the castle you tried to murder us in. That's rich." Robb lifted a hand to silence the Great John. "Hold your tongue, my lord," he said gently, though he did not break his gaze from Ser Ryman. "I'd hear what the Frey has to offer." Ser Ryman attempted to straighten his back. "If we remain your prisoners, king in the north, you risk provoking every Frey banner in the Riverlands. Even if your men have seized control here, dozens, perhaps hundreds of our loyal knights and sworn swords are scattered about. They'll rally to free us, or they might join with the Lannisters. Give me leave to tend to my house, and we'll swear fealty to you. We'll keep the bridges open under your authority." Nepertaten. Robb's anger flared. "You would swear fealty now, after you broke every vow of hospitality known to man? After your father spat on an oath to me not once but twice? Why would I ever trust a Frey's oath again?" Ser Ryman's face hardened, and a flicker of desperation flashed in his eyes. "There is no other way forward, but if you insist on vengeance, you'll find yourself in a siege against 1,000 Freys or more, with the Lannisters at their back. Do you truly wish that?" It was a threat, thinly disguised as reason. The Great John scowled, fists clenched at his sides, a vein throbbing in his forehead. A hush had fallen among the men gathered, as they waited for Robb's reaction. Caitlin stood a step behind Robb, silent but watchful. Robb felt his jaw tighten. Everything Ser Ryman said was plausible enough. There were more Freys scattered across the region. They could indeed rally, especially if Tywin Lannister saw advantage in backing them. He could ill afford a lengthy siege at the Twins, not with the war still raging to the south. Yet the notion of letting these snakes keep any measure of power in this castle was sickening. He turned to the Great John. "Take him away for now," he commanded quietly. "We'll keep him under guard. I'll have no illusions about trusting him, but neither will we kill him on the spot. See that he's well secured, and we'll decide what to do." "Nah." Ser Ryman tried to protest, but 2 Northmen grabbed his arms, hauling him out of the hall. The Great John followed with a dark grin, eager to see the matter handled. Several men drifted away then, returning to their various tasks, leaving Robb and Caitlin amid the echoes of that confrontation. The hall itself, though partially cleared, was still haunted by the memory of last night's attempted slaughter. The walls seemed to whisper with ghosts of the dead. He moved to one of the side tables, leaning against it. "They know how to sow division," he said to his mother. "Even now he tries to plant seeds of doubt. But we do have to consider the threat of scattered Freys regrouping." Caitlin nodded, resting a hand on his forearm. "We hold their Lord Paramount Walder himself in our dungeon. Their best approach for vengeance would be to gather men and attempt a rescue. But that's not easily done given the crossing is now under our control. Whether they muster on one side or the other, they'd have to assault the castle or attempt to starve us out." He took a measured breath. "We must ensure we can withstand such a siege. Or we must move on from here with all speed, taking Walder with us as a hostage. A fortress is a boon, but it's also an anchor. We risk tying our forces down here while the Lannisters march somewhere else." Caitlin stared at a dark stain on the floor, where a man must have bled out the night before. "We should speak with Edmure, see if the Riverlords can lend support. The Tully name still carries weight, even if Walder Frey has done his best to sully it. If your uncle can rally some men from River Run, we might hold this castle more securely, or at least keep it from becoming a liability." "Bentos," he agreed, and set off to find Edmure Tully, leaving his mother in the hall to continue coordinating the caretaking of the wounded. He crossed the courtyard, stepping carefully around the muddy, blood-darkened patches of ground. A small group of Stark men knelt near the stable doors, reciting quiet prayers for fallen friends. Their hushed voices were a solemn testament to the cost of the fiasco. Robb gave them a respectful nod, wishing he had time for a moment of prayer himself. Yet duty pressed him on. He ascended the steps to a modest tower that overlooked the eastern side of the Twins. The door at the top was guarded by two of Robb's own men, who let him pass. Inside a cramped chamber sat Edmure Tully and Rosalind Frey, side by side on a bench near a narrow window. Rosalind's face was still pale, her eyes red from tears. Edmure placed an arm around her shoulders, visibly torn between anger, pity, and an uncertain sense of obligation toward his new wife. At the sight of Robb, Edmure rose, carefully helping Rosalind to her feet. "My lord," he said, then corrected himself with a wan smile. "My king, I'd stand and bow, but it's been a trying day." Robb reached out, clasping his uncle's arm in a gesture of familial comfort. "No need for ceremony, uncle. I trust you're both feeling safe enough here?" Edmure made a face. "Safe, but not well. Too many ghosts roam these corridors. Rosalind is beside herself with grief and shame for what her father has done. I share in the anger, though my bride had no part in it. We had no time to truly know each other before we were thrown into this nightmare." "Dumder." Rosalind lowered her eyes, tears threatening again. "My father, he never told me of his plans. When the killing began, I feared we'd all be slaughtered. You and Edmure. I tried to warn you. But there was no chance at all." Her voice trembled like a reed in wind. Robb's gaze softened. He'd never believed her complicit. Walder Frey would have seen no benefit in telling his daughter anything of the scheme. "I know you're blameless, my lady. What's done is done, and I only hope you can find a measure of peace when all this is ended." "Nabertrand." She clasped her hands together tightly. "What will you do with my father? With my brothers and sisters?" He measured his words carefully. "I haven't decided the full extent of it yet. Walder Frey will stand for what he's done. Of that, I am certain. But the innocent, women and children who had no part in the treachery, will be spared. House Stark does not butcher the guiltless. The men who took up arms might face a different end, depending on whether they yield or try to continue this rebellion." "No." Rosalind swallowed hard, nodding. Edmure placed a gentle hand on her back. "She may be able to help," he said quietly. "Rosalind knows many of the servants, the hidden storehouses, the private passages. If we're to hold this place against any further Frey loyalists, her knowledge might be invaluable." Robb studied her, seeing the faint flicker of resolve in her eyes despite her terror. "Would you do that, my lady?" She took a shaky breath. "If it helps spare bloodshed. I have no love for what my father has done, for the countless lies he's told. If my knowledge can aid in securing the castle against my own kin who continue this madness, then yes, I will help." Edmure gave her an encouraging nod. Robb realized that in the face of all this heartbreak, perhaps a strange bond was forming between them. A sense of solidarity against Lord Walder's vile deeds. "Then I'll call upon you soon," he said. "We need to ensure the fortress remains secure. Any hidden passages that might allow Frey loyalists to slip inside must be sealed or guarded." "Then how? I will be my—" He hesitated, glancing at Edmure. "I also want your counsel, as Lord of Riverrun. We must decide if you'll ride forth to gather men from our Riverland allies, or should you remain here to manage the situation with your new wife. I don't want to tear you away from Roslyn, but—" Edmure gave a weary shrug. "My place is with my people, but I also see the importance of stabilizing this fortress. Roslyn needs me here for the moment. Perhaps we can send a trusted envoy. Sir Brynden, my uncle, is out there somewhere. The Blackfish can handle mustering allies. If we can get word to him quickly, he'll rally the houses loyal to the Tullys." Robb's spirits lifted slightly at the mention of Brynden Tully, a proven warrior and strategist. He gave a curt nod. "Yes, if the Blackfish can be found quickly, that might serve. We'll prepare ravens, dispatch men to deliver the message if need be." He paused, thinking of the many tasks that lay ahead. "Thank you, Uncle. Lady Roslyn, if you have the strength to do so tomorrow, I'll ask you to show us these hidden places. For tonight, rest. We'll post more guards at your door, in case any vengeful Frey tries something foolish." "No." He left them then, allowing Edmure to comfort his bride. The corridor outside felt chill, the torches hissing as an errant draft slipped through the cracks. Robb made his way back to the courtyard, calling for Hallis Mullen and a few other captains to gather at one corner of the yard that had been cleared for a command post of sorts. They awaited him by a crude map laid out on a barrel top, pinned by daggers to keep it from rolling in the breeze. Robb leaned over the map, hands braced on the barrel. With them stood a handful of men whose names he barely knew. Surgeons and scouts who'd been instrumental in subduing the castle. He listened as Hallis Mullen reported on the castle's perimeter. "We've barred every gate on the eastern side, placed archers on the walls. The western approach is more open, so we're doubling the watch there. Some outbuildings are still unsearched, but we'll get to them by morning. We found a handful of frightened small folk hiding in the stables, none of them armed. They claim no loyalty except to the harvest. We've let them be for now." "Dainina." A scout nodded, indicating a spot on the map. "We also sent men across the eastern bridge to check the roads for any sign of approaching forces. Nothing so far, but a couple of riders came up from the south bank, spotted our archers, then galloped away. Could be Frey outriders or bandits. Hard to say." Robb flexed his fingers on the barrel. "We can't chase every rider. Focus on solidifying our hold. We'll rotate fresh sentries through the night. No one should wander alone. We'll do a full sweep of each tower by morning. If we find any hidden pockets of Frey soldiers, they're to be disarmed and brought before us. Anyone who resists—" He caught himself, eyes darkening. "Then do what must be done, but spare innocents if possible. Let's not lower ourselves to Walder Frey's standard." Hallis Mullen gave a respectful incline of his head. The men exchanged grim looks of understanding. As they disbanded, the weight of it all pressed heavier on Robb. This was no simple camp arrangement. The Twins was an extensive fortress, 2 great towers connected by a fortified bridge. Holding it took more than a few swords. He would have to rely on men he trusted to watch corners, to manage supplies, to maintain discipline among an army that still reeled from the near massacre. At the same time, the men hungered for vengeance, some whispering that Walder Frey's entire brood deserved extermination for the betrayal. Robb had to hold them back from wholesale butchery. To turn the Twins into a charnel house would give the Lannisters endless propaganda. The name of Stark must remain the name of honor. He returned to the Great Hall, where a cluster of archers were conferring with the Greyjohn, who seemed in better spirits now that he had a task at hand. The man towered over them, gesturing with broad sweeps of his arm. When he saw Robb approach, he paused in his instructions, offering a toothy grin. "We'll keep watch on the northern tower from here, Your Grace. Any Frey trying to slip out won't get far." Robb nodded. "Continue. I might do a round of the walls soon. We must be thorough." "Nee." At that moment a voice echoed from the far corner of the hall. "King in the north." It was a woman's cry, tinged with desperation. Robb turned to see a young Frey girl, perhaps 14, being held back by two Stark soldiers. She wrestled against their grip, her eyes wide and wet with tears. "Please," she gasped. "My mother. She's locked in the storeroom. My little brother too." Robb lifted a hand to stay the guards. The girl's hair hung in loose tangles, her cheeks grimy with dust and tear tracks. Though he had no idea which branch of Walder's sprawling family tree she belonged to, her terror was plain. "Where are they?" he asked gently. She hesitated, glancing anxiously at the men. "In the lower keep storeroom, the one by the kitchens. Some of the guards locked them there before all the fighting. I don't know if they're alive. Please let me see them." He looked at the guards restraining her. "Take her there," he said softly, "and see if her family is indeed locked inside. If they are, release them if they offer no threat. We only hold prisoners of those who took up arms or who conspired in the betrayal." "De smoko." The guards nodded, one patting the sobbing girl on the shoulder in a not unkind gesture. She peered up at Robb, face etched with confusion and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. When they were gone, the Great John sidled closer. "We're going to spend days sifting the innocent from the guilty. It's a nest of vipers, if you ask me. The old man had so many spawn, half of them don't even know each other's names." Robb couldn't refute that. "We'll do the best we can," he said, though the enormity of the task threatened to crush him. "I won't slaughter children, no matter their name. We only punish those who had a hand in Walder's plot." A flicker of admiration crossed the Great Jan's face. "You're as honorable as Ned Stark ever was, and I respect that. Just be sure that honor doesn't blind you. Some of these young ones may grow up with hatred in their hearts for what we've done here. They might come seeking vengeance in years to come." Robb's shoulders sagged a fraction. "Then that's a burden I'll bear. Better that than murdering the helpless. We must break the cycle of atrocity somewhere." They parted ways, the Great John going to speak with the quartermasters. Robb, restless, decided to walk the walls, accompanied by a small escort of 5 men and Grey Wind at his side. He ascended the ramparts of the northern tower. The climb felt long, each step reminding him of the ache in his bandaged shoulder. Finally reaching the top, he found a stiff wind blowing in from the north. Below, the waters of the river churned in swirling eddies around the fortress foundations. The northern tower's vantage afforded a stark view of the sky, tinged with faint starlight. Clouds scudded across the moon, occasionally plunging the yard into gloom. The few fires below shuddered in the breeze. All along the battlements, Stark men huddled in pairs, cloaks pulled tight. They greeted Robb with weary salutes. He paused at one corner, leaning on the parapet. Grey Wind sniffed the air, ears pricked. Beyond the castle, darkness stretched across the land, the faint outlines of hills and fields just discernible. Out there, watchers might lurk, waiting for a chance to strike or to slip messages to whatever Frey allies remained. The thought was sobering. War never truly slept. His reflection was disturbed by a low voice behind him. He turned to see Catelyn once more, having followed him up the stairs with quiet determination. She joined him at the parapet, gazing out at the dark silhouette of the far tower across the bridge. Neither spoke for a time, content to share a rare moment of relative peace. Finally, she broke the silence. "What do you mean to do with Walder Frey?" she asked again, though her tone was gentler than before. "The men cry out for his blood, yet you hold back." He exhaled slowly. "Executing him would feel good, I'll not lie. Every time I see the aftermath in that hall, I want to hack off his head and mount it on a spike. But then I think of the Frey survivors scattered about, the alliances they might form if Walder is made a martyr. Perhaps we could ransom him, or trade him for key concessions. If we do it properly, it might cripple the house more effectively than a mere beheading. The world must see that a man who breaks guest right is punished." But how that punishment is delivered matters. Walder. She nodded slowly, her breath plumbing in the chill air. I don't envy you the choice. Perhaps tomorrow you can speak with him directly, see if he's contrite or defiant. Though I doubt he'll show remorse. Robb's lips curved in a bitter half-smile. I expect scorn, curses, and threats. Walder is too proud, even in chains, to beg. But the realm will want an accounting. One day, if the war ends and a Stark still sits in Winterfell, it'll be known that Walder Frey paid for his sins. Nan, Catelyn placed a hand over his. Then let the men see your strength. Show them you are a king who wields justice with care, not cruelty. Your father would be proud to see that. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the echoes of Ned Stark's voice in his memory. When you choose to kill a man, look him in the eyes and hear his final words. That is the way of House Stark. If Walder's fate were a clean execution on the block, Robb would stand behind the blade himself. The question remained whether it was the wisest course. Footsteps sounded on the stone stairs. One of Hallis Mullen's men came into view, breath puffing in short bursts, a letter in his hand. A raven arrived, your grace, delivered by our watchers at the postern gate. It bears the seal of River Run. Robb took the parchment, curiosity sparking. He held it up to the torchlight. The seal was indeed that of House Tully. After breaking it open, he read by the wavering glow. Catelyn watched his face carefully. The contents were brief but urgent, penned in a familiar hand. Sir Desmond Grell, Castellan of Riverrun, wrote that Tywin Lannister's forces were on the move near Harrenhal. Rumors circulated that the Lannisters sought to confirm news of the Starks' fate. Some believed Robb had been killed at the Twins. Tywin, apparently uncertain, was dispatching scouts in all directions to verify. The letter warned that River Run could not risk sending large numbers of men away until they were certain the Lannisters would not descend upon the castle. Additionally, the letter expressed shock and relief at hearing that Robb Stark might still live, though the details were unclear. Grell implored Robb to send word of his situation at once. Robb handed the parchment to Catelyn so she could read it for herself. They believe I might be dead, he said. Tywin's uncertain. That buys us a little time, but not much. We need to confirm to our allies we still stand, or they may lose heart. Catelyn read it twice, then folded the parchment. We must send ravens immediately. Let the river lords in the north know the truth. Let them hear that the king in the north lives, that Walder Frey's treachery failed, and that we hold the twins. Lyanin? He agreed, pondering the strategic advantage. If word spread swiftly, some might flock to their cause with renewed vigor, especially after seeing the Freys unmasked as traitors. Yet it might also provoke Tywin into decisive action once he learned the attempt on Robb's life had failed. Still, secrecy served little purpose now that the immediate danger was contained. They descended the tower steps together, discussing plans to expedite the messages. They would have the castle's remaining ravens put to use under watchful eyes, ensuring no hidden Frey loyalists tampered with them. By the time they reached the courtyard, a fresh chill swept through, and Robb realized how late it had grown. The hours bled away in this constant crisis. He found the Great John near the keep entrance, where a small brazier provided light and warmth. The two men conferred briefly about sending out a dozen riders, in addition to ravens. The Great John dispatched some of his best riders on swift horses, each carrying identical letters in case one or two were intercepted. After seeing the riders off, Robb made a final circuit of the yard. Northmen stood vigil at every archway. Frey prisoners in a storage barn moaned for mercy, or cursed their captors. In the distance, he could hear the faint sobbing of some frightened soul, echoing as if from a dream. Men were carefully stacking corpses near a side gate, preparing to see them decently dealt with on the morrow. Torches glowed, casting monstrous shadows. At last, near collapse from the day's burdens, Robb allowed himself to be guided back to the tower room he'd been assigned. There, he sat heavily on the straw pallet, shrugging off his cloak and boots. Gray wind curled up near the door, ears perked. The meager hearth gave only a faint warmth, but Robb was grateful for any comfort at all. He pressed a hand to his bandaged shoulder, feeling the dull throb that reminded him of his mortality. Another inch, another heartbeat, and he might have joined those being stacked for burial. The entire war could have ended in that hall of betrayal. Sleep did not come easily. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of crossbow bolts and spilled wine, the twisted features of Walder Frey, the lifeless eyes of loyal Northmen who had followed him into that trap. The memory of Grey Wind's fierce howls reverberated in his mind. It took all his will to banish those images and find a thin, restless slumber. Even then, the nightmares crept in, reminding him how close the Red Wedding had come to destroying House Stark entirely. He woke long before dawn, heart pounding from some half-remembered terror. Outside, the sky still lay in blackness. A single torch burned near the chamber door, where 2 guards stood silent watch. For a moment, Robb couldn't recall where he was, his senses muddled. Then the weight of reality returned, heavier than any nightmare. He raked a hand through his hair, rose, and dressed. Grey Wind padded after him as he slipped out of the chamber, acknowledging the guards with a curt nod. He wandered the corridors aimlessly at first, letting the chill stone walls steady his thoughts. A part of him yearned for the modest solace of the Godswood at Winterfell, or even the courtyard in Riverrun. But here there was no such sanctuary. The twins had no revered heart tree, only cold halls built to fortify power. Eventually, he found himself descending into the deeper levels of the castle, guided by torchlight and a lingering need to face the cause of his nightmares head-on. 2 stark guards stood before a stout iron gate. Beyond it lay the dungeons, once Walder Frey's domain for punishing his enemies, now serving to keep Walder in chains. The guards straightened upon seeing their king, but Robb placed a hand on one soldier's shoulder to reassure him. "I want to see him." They exchanged a quick glance. "He's been ranting half the night," one guard said. "Cursing your name, cursing all Starks. We gave him water, but he refused to drink. Said it was poisoned. He's an old, bitter man." Robb nodded and gestured for them to open the gate. The corridor beyond was cramped, each cell blocked by heavy bars. Small torches flickered every few paces, the smoke gathering near the arched ceiling. The smell was fetid, a mix of stale air, rot, and unwashed bodies. Most cells were empty, though a few imprisoned Frey knights or soldiers languished in the gloom. They either shrank back from the torchlight or hurled curses. Robb ignored them, his heart pounding louder with each step. At the end of the corridor, a single guard stood by the final cell, gaze flicking nervously from the occupant to Robb. The occupant was Walder Frey, hunched on a wooden bench, wrists shackled, his once rich clothing now torn and stained. The cunning sparkle in his eyes remained, but it was tinged with a raw fury that flared as soon as Robb came into view. "So, the wolf boy creeps in the night," Walder rasped. His voice carried a slight tremor, but hatred steadied it. "Come to gloat." Robb inhaled slowly. "I have come to see the face of treachery," he replied, keeping his tone cool. "I want to look upon the man who nearly murdered my family in a sacred ceremony." Walder spat, though most of the spittle fell short of the bars and dribbled down his chin. "You brought this on yourself. You think I'd forget your refusal to honor our bargain? You cast aside my daughter for some foreign wench, then expected me to take it meekly." His lips curled in a sneer. "I only sought to teach you the price of spurning House Frey." Robb's hands tightened on the torch haft. "And in so doing you violated the oldest laws of gods and men. You sought to butcher us in your own hall. You murdered guests under your protection." Walder gave a choked laugh, revealing stained teeth. "So what? The world is full of such betrayals. Did you think war was honorable? Did you think your father's head was taken by honorable men? I simply did what was necessary to ensure House Frey standing in a world that mocks weakness." A wave of revulsion swept over Robb. He stepped closer to the iron bars, feeling Grey Wind press against his side. The direwolf let out a low growl that made Walder flinch. "Your house is now undone," Robb said quietly. "Your kin are scattered, your castle is mine. I should kill you here and now for all the blood you've shed." Walder bared his teeth in a ghastly grin. "Then do it. Put me out of my misery. Show me that famous stark mercy and kill an old man in a cell? Or are you too squeamish to see your vengeance through? Nah. Robb stared at him for a long moment, recalling the words he had spoken to his mother. To deliver justice in a manner that served the realm as well as satisfied the men's thirst for retribution. You'll die, Walder Frey, he said at last, voice tight. But not today. Perhaps not tomorrow. First, you'll face the realm's judgment. All will know what you did, and all will know the price of it. Walder let out a ragged bark of laughter. You're a fool if you think the realm cares. Do you think the Lannisters uphold guest right any better? You think the Ironborn do? Ha! The realm's memory is fickle, wolf boy. Once you're gone, they'll forget all your talk of justice. Robb forced himself to remain still, though every fiber of his being screamed to draw his sword. Then let the North remember, he said, echoing the ancient vow. We will remember long after your bones turn to dust. Grey wind snarled, and Walder shrank back against the wall, turning his face away. Robb lingered a moment longer, letting the old man feel the weight of the direwolf's gaze. Then he turned on his heel and walked out, the cell door clanging shut behind him. The guard locked it, and the corridor's echoes swallowed Walder's muttered curses. Robb marched back up the dungeon steps, throat tight with anger he could barely contain. He had beheld the worst face of cruelty, that of a lord who cared nothing for the sacred bonds that held society together. In a way, Walder Frey embodied every sickness that plagued the realm. By the time he emerged into the courtyard, dawn was breaking in pale streaks across the horizon. Men had begun stirring anew. Small cookfires were lit, pots steaming with whatever provisions could be spared. A few crows circled overhead, as if drawn by the smell of death. Robb inhaled the cold morning air, letting it wash away the dungeon's foulness. He found Caitlin waiting near the well, speaking quietly with two older Northmen. She dismissed them upon seeing Robb approach. You look troubled, she said gently, as he took a ladle of water from the well and drank. Did you see Walder? I did, he murmured, wiping his mouth. He's unrepentant. He wants me to kill him on the spot, to confirm all his beliefs about our so-called false honor. He glanced around at the castle yard. We'll do this properly. He'll face the condemnation of the realm, and we'll see if we can't pry something useful from him first. House Frey's fortunes rest on his cunning. Perhaps we can glean how to subvert any remaining alliances he has. Then, in time, we'll see him hanged or beheaded or whatever form of justice we deem fit. But not yet. Caitlin searched his eyes. Then we should press on, gather our strength, and prepare to move from here if need be. We can't stay locked in the Twins forever. There is a war yet to finish. He nodded, though the thought of further battles weighed heavily on his heart. He felt the burden of each life lost for his cause. But the war would not pause for grief or reflection. Tywin Lannister's shadow loomed large in the south, and rumors of other threats. Bolton's uncertain loyalty, the Greyjoys raiding the coast, only fueled the sense that the realm stood on the brink of chaos. Standing there in the cold morning light, Robb reflected that the Red Wedding might have become his epitaph had fortune not intervened. Instead, he and his men had turned the tables on Walder Frey, capturing the Twins. Yet the nights ahead would be filled with new perils. House Stark had a chance to survive, but he could not falter in caution or strength. One false step, and all they had gained could be undone. He stepped away from the well, gesturing for Caitlin to walk with him. Westmoreland approached, saluting, and reported that the first ravens had been dispatched at dawn, bearing word of the victory to River Run, White Harbor, Bear Island, and any loyal bannermen they could name. Robb prayed those messages would reach their destinations quickly, and that men of honor would unite against the stain of treachery Walder Frey had unleashed. As they walked, Rosalind Frey emerged from a corridor, eyes downcast. She carried a small sheaf of parchment, presumably notes she'd compiled about the secret passages. She curtsied before Robb, then glanced at Caitlin, uncertain. Robb steeled himself and offered a kind nod. Thank you for your help. I promise we will not harm those who remain loyal only to life and peace in this castle. She swallowed hard, offering the notes with trembling hands. I wrote down everything I know, the passages, the storerooms, the places my father kept private. He never allowed me in some areas, but I overheard enough to guess their purpose. Robb accepted the notes. We'll see they're guarded. You have my gratitude." He noticed Edmure hovering behind her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. The new couple, thrust together by the darkest fate, seemed bound now by shared trauma. Perhaps that bond might grow into something, or perhaps it would remain a husk of forced duty. Only time would tell. Across the yard, the Greyjohn shouted orders at men carrying a makeshift stretcher with another wounded soldier. A raven soared overhead, cawing sharply. The morning had fully broken now, though the sun's warmth remained elusive behind gray clouds. Robb lingered, scanning the battlements, the keep, the shattered remnants of celebration. The Red Wedding had indeed failed, but the cost was steep. With Walder Frey in his dungeon, a measure of justice had been served. Now came the even harder task, holding the twins against a realm in turmoil, forging alliances anew, and leading the Northmen toward the next chapter of this war. He could almost hear his father's voice. "When you start a fight, be prepared to finish it. Never leave an enemy behind that might rise again." Walder Frey was an enemy forcibly contained, but the seeds of vengeance could still grow. The North remembered, and Robb vowed that no matter how many nights he woke to the memory of crossbow bolts, the next time the realm tested them, they would stand ready. Let the day come when the war concluded, and the North could return home. He yearned for that day. Until then, the Wolf King would endure, shoulders heavy with the weight of duty, his hand never far from his sword. He drew in a last steadying breath, gave Caitlin a look that said both "I am weary, and I will not yield," and set off to begin the morning's round of inspections. The men would need to see their king among them, unwavering and focused. The day's tasks loomed large, deciding fates, reinforcing walls, managing supplies, hearing grievances, preparing for the next threat that might come from beyond these riverbanks. The war was far from done, but they had survived the unthinkable, escaping a massacre that would have wiped out House Stark. Perhaps the old gods or the new had smiled upon them this once. Now it fell to Robb Stark to prove worthy of that reprieve. He strode across the yard, cloak fluttering behind him, gray wind at his side, and the Northmen took heart at the sight of their king, still alive, still fighting, and still determined to see justice prevail. Wall. Robb Stark paced through the keep's courtyard, boots crunching on damp gravel still stained with the remnants of chaos. The morning sky, pallid and cool, spread over the twins, offering no comfort, only a half-hearted light that revealed every scar in the stone walls, every shattered remnant of the night's carnage. The fortress had grown quieter since dawn, but the hush carried tension rather than peace. Men moved in subdued formation, swords clinking at their belts, crossbow strings retied with methodical efficiency. The war was far from over, and they knew it. The memory of betrayal still hung in the air like a sour taste on the tongue. Twice as many archers now lined the walls. Some stared out across the river, others guarded the open yard and the inner parapets, watchful for any lurking Frey loyalists. In the distance, crows circled over the spot where corpses had been gathered for later burial. A few were Northmen, claimed by crossbow bolts or blades in the night's treachery. More wore Frey colors. The stench of death pricked at the nostrils of any who walked too close. Yet tasks needed doing, and Robb's men had systematically set about them. Cleaning the stable yard, clearing debris from doorways, posting guards at every vantage. Amid the bustle, Robb felt as if he trod a knife's edge between exhaustion and the demands of leadership. He had stolen perhaps an hour of restless sleep after his confrontation with Walder in the dungeons, and the tension in his shoulders refused to ease. Each time he closed his eyes, he remembered how close they had come to utter ruin. Yet he was here, alive, with his mother by his side, and the Greyjohn barking orders like a wolf in human form. They had the twins. Walder was in chains. Now the question was how to seize advantage from a situation so fraught with risk. He approached a cluster of men near the storerooms. Hallis Mullen, Lord Blackwood, and a few others of lesser rank. They stood around a wooden table set up hastily in the courtyard, a map weighed down by stones. Hallis tapped a gauntleted finger on a portion of the parchment. "We found 3 hidden storerooms so far," he said as Robb arrived. The Lady Rosalind's notes helped, but there could be more. It's a damned rabbit warren in there. Some storehouses hold enough grain and salted fish to feed us for weeks. Others are half empty. The old man must have been hoarding supplies in case of a siege, but not distributing them evenly. Lord Blackwood nodded, a hint of weariness in his eyes. These hidden caches might be why Walder dared plan your murder. He had confidence he could outlast retaliations. No doubt he thought to hold the crossing even if the riverlords besieged him. The man's cunning ran deep. Dummy. Robb exhaled. We'll root out every supply cache. Post trustworthy men in charge. We can't afford to let any Frey loyalists slip away with provisions or sabotage them. Hallis Mullen gave a curt bow. We've begun. I'll see it done thoroughly, Your Grace. As the men dispersed, Robb lingered, scanning the yard. The Grey John caught his eye from across the way, raising an arm in greeting before turning back to direct a half-dozen archers. The wind ruffled the Great John's mane of hair and tugged at the stark banners newly hung on the battlements. It was a strange sight, wolf sigils replacing the twin towers that once declared Frey rule of this place. A scuff of boots behind him announced Caitlyn's presence. She came quietly, hands folded at her waist, eyes dark with concern. You haven't eaten, she observed in a tone that brooked no protest. Nor have you tended that shoulder wound properly. Maester Ryman's been up for hours in the infirmary, seeing to the wounded. You should let him change your bandages. Robb almost refused, 100 worries clamoring for his attention, but he recognized the sense in her words. Very well, he murmured, pressing a hand to the stiff cloth taped across his shoulder. It felt hot beneath the linen, a mild throbbing echoing with each heartbeat. But first, is there any news from the ravens we sent? Any sign of the Blackfish or word from our allies? She shook her head. No replies yet, though ravens can fly only so fast. The men you sent on horseback might return with news sooner, if they manage to ride hard without interference. I expect it'll be another day or two before we learn where the Blackfish stands. That's Indian, he sighed, glancing at the sky as though straining to spot a distant raven. We can't stay idle, but let me see Maester Ryman, if only to keep my mother from fretting. Her expression softened. Thank you, Robb. They made their way into the keep, stepping through the corridors that once teemed with Frey servants. Now, stark guards stood at every intersection, their posture tense. The great hall's double doors were open to let in fresh air, though the interior remained gloomy, as if the stone itself still remembered the violence. Caitlyn led him past the hall's threshold. Inside, they found a scene of labor. Men scrubbing dried blood from the floor, stacking broken chairs, and dragging aside ruined tapestries. A few bodies, covered with rough blankets, waited to be removed. Robb's gut twisted to see so many dead. He forced himself to keep walking, head high, though each step felt like a weight pressing deeper into his soul. Beyond the hall lay a set of chambers repurposed into an infirmary. The smell of herbs and the faint sting of antiseptics mingled with the sharper sense of blood, sweat, and anguish. A handful of wounded Northmen lay on pallets, some sleeping, others shifting restlessly. A pale sunbeam cut through a narrow window, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Maester Ryman, an older man with thinning white hair, bustled from one cot to the next, aided by a younger steward. Upon seeing Robb, the maester gave a slight bow of his head, though his features pinched with worry. Your Grace, I heard of your wound. We should see to it at once. Infection takes root swiftly if neglected. Robb nodded, removing his cloak with some difficulty and unbuckling his sword belt. He handed both to Caitlyn, who set them aside. Maester Ryman gestured to a stool and carefully helped peel away the bandages. A hiss of breath escaped Robb's lips as air brushed the raw edges. The crossbow bolt had only grazed him, but the laceration was deep enough to be troublesome. The surrounding skin reddened. The maester dabbed gently with a cloth steeped in vinegar and herbs. Robb fought the urge to tense away from the sting. He glanced around the makeshift infirmary at the others. Men with bandaged limbs or torsos, some with splints, some lying too still. The hush was occasionally broken by muffled groans. Caitlin knelt beside one wounded soldier, whispering soft words. Robb couldn't hear what she said, but he saw the man's pained eyes flicker with a hint of gratitude. The maester finished cleaning and applied a salve that smelled pungent, pressing fresh bandages in place. "Change them at least once a day," Maester Ryman instructed. "And try not to strain that shoulder too much. You need rest." Robb gave a hollow smile. "I'll do my best, Maester, but rest is a luxury given what we face." "You'd do your men no favors by risking fever," the Maester warned gently. "At least take care to avoid reopening it." A quick nod of understanding was the only promise Robb could offer. Once the bandaging was secure, he pulled his tunic back over his head, wincing at the twinge. Caitlin rejoined him, her gaze flickering to the newly dressed wound. "We'll find a quiet moment for you to eat," she said. "You can't fight on an empty stomach." He wanted to argue, but a wave of dizziness from lack of food or sleep made him think better of it. "Fine, show me the way." They left the infirmary, returning to the corridor. A pair of Stark men stood guard near the door, stiffening at Robb's approach. He recognized them vaguely. One was from House Serwyn, the other a Karstark man who had chosen to remain loyal after the death of Lord Rickard Karstark. A complicated thread of memory tugged at Robb, reminding him how many alliances had fractured since this war began. Yet here these two men were, standing side by side in the aftermath of betrayal. He paused, acknowledging them with a grateful nod. "You've done well," he said quietly. "I'll not forget it." They beamed slightly, an earnest pride lighting their tired faces. Robb continued on, wishing he had a chance to speak with every man who'd risked life and limb last night. Perhaps in time. For now, survival and stabilizing the fortress took priority. Caitlin led him to a smaller chamber just off the great hall where a simple meal had been laid. Bread, cheese, boiled eggs, and some dried fruit. The bread was a day old, but the cheese had a pungent richness, no doubt part of Walder Frey's ample stores. A jug of watered wine stood ready. Robb sank onto a bench at a rough-hewn table, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Gray Wind, who had been trailing them quietly, now settled by his feet, snout resting on outstretched paws. Caitlin leaned against the table, arms folded, watching as Robb tore a hunk of bread and chewed mechanically. "This is the first proper meal you've had since..." She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. The Red Wedding, or the near-red wedding that had nearly destroyed them all, was an unspoken shadow in every conversation. He swallowed, washing the dryness from his throat with a sip of wine. "I suppose it is," he admitted. "Feels like the night never ended. We stepped into darkness, and we're still walking in it." Her voice softened. "But the dawn has come, Robb. We are still here." He nodded, though her reassurance only went so far. So many had died. He wondered if the families of the fallen would ever forgive him for bringing their loved ones to such peril. War had demanded it, and Walder Frey had twisted the blade. Still, guilt gnawed at the edges of Robb's composure. Before he could sink further into dark thoughts, the door creaked open and Edmure Tully stepped in, looking both relieved and anxious at finding them. His eyes flicked to the plate of food. "You're eating," Edmure remarked. "Good. I was worried you'd not slow down enough to do so." Robb beckoned him closer, wiping crumbs from his mouth. "Any news, Uncle?" Edmure shook his head. "None from River Run yet. But I've been walking the perimeter with Lady Rosalind, verifying those secret passages she spoke of." She pointed out two more we hadn't discovered. Narrow, hidden behind wine racks in the cellar, both leading outside the walls. The guards have them sealed now. Heavy beams hammered across them. We'll post watchers too. Dean Dahmer. Caitlin arched a brow. "She's proving quite helpful. May the gods keep her safe from the blame of her family." Edmure exhaled. "She fears retaliation from any Frey kin who refuse to yield. But Rosalind says they must realize the battle is lost, or at least that Walder's plan is foiled. She's worried about her mother and younger siblings, but I can't say who among the Freys is still unaccounted for." "Nay." Robb finished the last of his bread and cheese. He wiped his hands on a cloth. "We'll keep watch for stragglers. With those passages sealed, they can't sneak a larger force inside. If the Lannisters try anything, we'll see it from the walls." He glanced at Edmure. For the moment though, we need to consider how to keep control without slaughtering every Frey in sight. If we overreach, we become the villains. That might drive neutrals into Tywin's arms. Dammit. Edmure nodded, though bitterness tightened his mouth. I hate to say it, but you speak truth. There was a time I wanted them all hung for threatening my life, my wedding. But I see sense. We must show the realm a measure of justice and restraint. Catelyn let out a soft sigh. We also cannot linger indefinitely, fending off ghostly threats. Tywin moves while we stand still. If we become pinned down here, we might lose the war for the north. Can we spare a garrison large enough to hold the twins, or do we risk marching on and leaving a skeleton crew behind? Robb leaned back, folding his arms. That's the question. The twins is too crucial to abandon. But we can't station half our army here. We need men if we're to face Tywin's legions. Until we hear from the Blackfish, we lack enough Riverland support to fill these walls with loyal soldiers. A thoughtful pause. It occurs to me we might press some of the less guilty Freys into service under close watch. They know this fortress best. If Rosalind can verify who among them is least likely to turn cloak again, we could use their knowledge to maintain it. Des. Edmure rubbed his jaw. An uneasy alliance to say the least, but if they're faced with Walder's downfall, some might scramble to prove loyalty, if only to save themselves. Precisely. Robb nodded. They don't have to love us. Fear of punishment might suffice. Better than letting them all rot in the dungeons until Tywin arrives. I'll speak with Rosalind about it. He pushed himself to standing, ignoring the dull ache in his shoulder. Grey wind stirred at his feet, rising in tandem. Catelyn offered no objection this time, sensing his mind was set. Edmure reached out a hand as if to halt him, then withdrew it. We'll join you soon, Edmure said. I want to check on Rosalind first. She said she'd be in the chapel. Praying. Robb nodded, recalling that the Freys had a small sept near the eastern tower. Little wonder Rosalind found solace in prayer after the horrors of the wedding feast. He cast a final look at the meal table, half of it still untouched. The sight almost made him grimace. He'd eaten enough to chase away his dizziness. That would have to suffice. He emerged back into the corridors, accompanied by Catelyn, who insisted on following. The twins felt at once claustrophobic and enormous, with every passage echoing under vaulted stone ceilings. More guards had replaced the fallen, though it pained Robb to see so many new faces pulled from various northern or river houses, all wearing expressions of grim determination. The war had turned them into watchers and wardens in a fortress they never asked to hold. Their footsteps led them to a portion of the keep that overlooked the main river crossing. From narrow windows, one could see the wide flow of the waters, the slow swirl under heavy gray clouds. Some fishermen's boats drifted near the far bank, manned by locals who seemed uncertain if they should flee or carry on. The crossing, once fiercely controlled by the Freys, was now lined with stark men carrying spears. A cluster of them guarded the drawbridge mechanism, making sure it remained in the raised position, unless Robb or the Great John commanded otherwise. He paused at one of the windows, gazing out. A pair of banners hung from the ramparts. One the stark direwolf, the other the Tully fish. Together, they fluttered in the chill breeze. I wonder if the world is already abuzz with rumors, he mused. We've broken the Freys and seized the twins. That's no small feat, even if the how of it was near catastrophe. Catelyn set a hand on the stone windowsill. Rumors spread faster than ravens. No doubt word reaches every market and inn that the Red Wedding was thwarted and Walder Frey imprisoned. Men will tell the tale in 100 ways. Some might call it a twist of fate that the wolf survived, Robb said bitterly. Others might claim we orchestrated the entire fiasco ourselves. Such is rumor. She turned her gaze to him. Does it matter in the end what story they tell? So long as House Stark remains standing, you'll shape the realm's perception by your actions now. He considered that, feeling again the weight of leadership. Then we must show them the difference between Stark justice and Frey betrayal. Let us see if any among Walder's brood have sense enough to kneel and help us keep peace here. Then, a trio of Stark guards came marching down the corridor. escorting a middle-aged Frey with a blackened eye and a filthy surcoat. He stumbled along, muttering curses under his breath. Upon sighting Robb, the guards halted and saluted. The Frey squinted, as though in disbelief, then sneered. "King in the north," he spat, voice dripping sarcasm. "You'll regret this. My cousins will come from the south. You'll be drowned in blood soon enough." Robb regarded him with calm intensity. "Name yourself." "Ben Frey," the man growled. "Son of Walden Frey, not that you care." Robb studied him a moment. "We do care, actually. You might have information about the scattered Frey men. The more sense you speak, the less your father and cousins will suffer." Ben Frey barked a dry laugh. "Suffer? You hold us in chains, dog. We'll say nothing." Caitlin stepped closer, her voice cool. "Lord Walder is in a cell, and so shall you remain if you refuse to see reason. But if you help us secure this castle and protect the innocents, perhaps you could earn some measure of leniency." "See." He spat on the floor in response, glaring with raw hatred. Robb signaled for the guards to move on. "Lock him back in the dungeons," Robb said quietly. "No food until he reconsiders whether he wants to cooperate." The man hurled insults as they led him away, yet a flicker of fear underpinned his bluster. Robb doubted that fear would turn him into an ally, but it might eventually yield compliance. Once the echo of boots faded, Caitlin let out a small sigh. "And so it goes," she murmured. "We're playing jailers to half the Frey line." "Half or more," Robb agreed darkly. "But I'd rather keep them alive and caged than add more blood to our ledger. Let them see how we treat our enemies, not with wanton cruelty, but with a resolve that does not bend." He continued down the corridor, descending a spiral stair that led to a lower level opening onto the western courtyard. This smaller yard had once housed chickens, goats, and a vegetable patch for the Frey's kitchens. Now it was deserted, but for a few cowering stable hands and a single guard post near the gate. Most livestock had been scattered or slain during the pandemonium of the night, leaving only a handful of frightened animals locked in pens. Robb paused near a rickety fence that surrounded a half-ruined coop. A donkey brayed from a corner stable, perhaps hungry or distressed. Scenes of ordinary life gone awry under the pall of violence haunted every corner. Caitlin tapped Robb's arm gently. "Listen," she said. Distantly, from the far side of the yard, they heard a faint voice raised in anger. Robb moved toward the sound, skirting a stack of broken barrels. Rounding the corner, they found a cluster of Northmen confronting 3 Frey women and 2 younger men, barely more than boys, near what looked like a root cellar. The women clutched each other fearfully, while the 2 boys stood in front, brandishing wooden staves as if they could repel armed soldiers. One of the Northmen, a tall fellow with a freshly bandaged arm, barked, "Step aside, you pups! We're searching every nook for hidden weapons. You can't hide your family's treachery." "No, don't die." The older of the 2 boys, perhaps 16, trembled but didn't budge. "We have no weapons," he insisted. "Only a place to store onions and carrots. You'll find no crossbows in there." Caitlin stepped forward, raising her voice to diffuse the tension. "Let them pass, soldier. I'll handle this." She gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We mean you no harm if you haven't taken arms against us. Let us see the root cellar to be certain, and you can go in peace." "Mammon?" The boy hesitated, glancing at the Northman's drawn steel, then at Caitlin's steady, maternal gaze. At length he nodded and lowered his makeshift staff. One of the women began weeping softly as the soldiers rummaged through the root cellar, returning a moment later with a bundle of onions and 2 sacks of potatoes. "No weapons here," the tall soldier reported grudgingly. Robb, who had stood back to observe, stepped in. "Is there anyone else with you?" The older woman swallowed, her lips trembling. "We had a cousin. He left at dawn. Tried to find. I don't know. He just ran. We have no notion of Walder's plot. We only keep the kitchens. Please, we want no trouble." "Let him." Robb studied them, seeing only frightened civilians who likely had no part in the massacre. "No trouble then," he murmured. "You'll remain under watch while we secure the castle, but if you've no involvement, you'll not be harmed. The North does not slaughter the innocent." One of the Northmen looked as if he might protest, but a quick glare from Robb stopped him. The new code for the day was clear. Men who tried to seek revenge on non-combatants would answer to the king in the north, and the punishment would be swift. No more needless bloodshed. The 5 Freys nodded, relief mingled with uncertainty on their faces. Caitlin beckoned to a guard. "Escort them to the central keep. Let them stay with the others who surrendered. We'll provide water and a meal." The group was led away, the younger boy looking back over his shoulder as though half expecting a sword in his spine. Robb caught a glimpse of the boy's wide, terrified eyes, and his own heart twisted. The illusions of a clean war had long since vanished, replaced by these raw vignettes of fear and sorrow. If they were to be better than Walder Frey, they had to walk a fine line between vigilance and compassion. He sighed, turning to Caitlin. "Another corner cleared. Only 1,000 more to go?" She nodded, her expression guarded. "We do what we must. The war left us no choice but to take this keep. Let us not become the monsters we fight." They shared a brief look of mutual resolve, then continued through the yard. Eventually, they reached the older postern gate on the western side, which led out toward a stretch of rolling terrain. The gate stood closed, barred from within, and 4 of Robb's men guarded it. A high walkway ran along the outer wall. From above, a soldier called down, "All quiet out here, your grace." No sign of horseman or foot, only farmland and hills. Robb gave an acknowledging wave. "Good. No. Remain on guard." Mendatsor. He wandered onward, passing sections of the fortress he had yet to see in daylight. A row of storerooms with half-collapsed roofs, a small courtyard overshadowed by the western tower's looming walls, and a rear gatehouse reinforced with thick iron-bound doors. Some areas looked half-abandoned. Perhaps Walder Frey had not cared to maintain them, or perhaps the fortress was simply too large for day-to-day upkeep, unless fully staffed. Now the handful of living servants cowered, unsure which side of history they'd be forced to choose. At last, Robb circled back toward the main courtyard, where a commotion arose near the eastern tower entrance. He quickened his pace, gray wind darting ahead, ears pricked. Soldiers parted to let him through. In the center of the bustle stood the Great John, gripping a struggling prisoner by the collar of his tunic. The prisoner was a wiry Frey man with a face contorted by hatred. 3 of the Great John's men ringed them, weapons half drawn. "Quiet, you wretch," boomed the Great John, shaking the man as if he were a rag doll. "You want to murder a child in front of me, do you? The king in the north will flay you alive for that." "Neither staying." Robb approached, voice stern. "What happened here?" The Great John's broad chest heaved. "Caught this rat with a dagger pressed to a stable boy's throat, over yonder by the feeding trough. Claimed he'd cut the boy's throat if we didn't let him run free." The prisoner spat on the ground. "The boy's a Frey, you fool. He's no child, just a viper in training. Should have killed him right then, if not for your meddling." A flash of anger sparked in Robb. He locked eyes with the Great John. "Is the stable boy hurt?" "He's shaken. A small cut on his neck. But he'll live," the Great John replied. The dagger never went deep. Robb let out a slow breath. The last thing they needed was Northmen taking vengeance on children. "You know my orders?" he said to the Great John. "He threatened an innocent, a child. That's not an act of war. It's cold-blooded. We do not excuse that." The Great John nodded, lips peeled back in a snarl. "Shall we put him in the dungeon with the others?" Robb hesitated, looking at the man's wild eyes. In that gaze, he saw nothing but hatred and a lust for blood. This was the sort of wrath that, if left unchecked, could spread among the ranks. Yet was it wise to fill the dungeons with criminals of both sides, turning the fortress into a massive jailhouse? Some acts demanded a swift example. "Slowly," Robb said. "Take him to the courtyard. Gather a few men to witness. We will show that any such cruelty is not tolerated." A hush fell as the Great John nodded, seeing that Robb meant to pass immediate judgment. Word spread quickly. Soldiers and a few curious servants trickled out to see what sentence the king in the north would deliver. In the center of the courtyard, the Great John flung the prisoner to his knees. Robb stood before him, hand on the hilt of his sword. Gray wind prowled at the edges, snarling low in his throat. The man glared up, spittle flecking his lips. "You pretend you're so noble," he hissed. "Yet I know you'd kill us all if you could. Bunch of wolf devils, that's what you are." Robb shook his head. "I kill men who take up arms against me. But a stable boy is no soldier. You threatened an innocent as a hostage. That's not the custom of war. It's murder. I cannot abide it among my own men any more than among the Freys. By your actions, you place yourself beyond the mercy of these walls. And now." He drew his sword, the steel catching the wan sunlight. A ripple of shock went through the onlookers. Some might have expected Robb to toss the man in a cell, but Robb sensed the need for a stern precedent. To let a man think such acts permissible would poison their entire campaign. He raised his voice so all could hear. "You faced no threat from that boy. He was unarmed. A stable hand. You stooped to butchering a child out of hatred. I, Robb Stark, sentence you to death. Merci." The man's eyes bulged. He tried to struggle up, but the Great John planted a big hand on his shoulder, forcing him down. "Wait," the man gasped. "I fought for you all last night. I joined your side. You joined no one," Robb said coldly. "Your only loyalty is to your own vengeance." A hush fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the condemned. Robb set his jaw, remembering his father's teachings. The one who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He could have delegated the task, but he would not shirk it. He stepped behind the man, lifted the blade, and brought it down cleanly, severing the man's head in a single stroke. The body crumpled to the dirt, blood soaking into the earth. A muffled gasp rose from some watchers. Others grimly nodded, recognizing the necessity. Robb drew a breath, swallowing the knot in his throat. He wiped his sword on the man's tunic, sheathed it. Looking around, he addressed the crowd. "No matter your grievances, we will not murder children. We are men of the North, not beasts who kill the helpless." The Great John placed a hand over his heart in silent agreement. Few words followed. The watchers dispersed, some returning to their duties, others exchanging worried glances. The story would spread quickly, ensuring that any lingering bloodthirst would be tempered by the knowledge of King Robb's swift justice. Caitlin stepped forward, eyes shadowed by sorrow. "It had to be done," she whispered. "But it still weighs heavily." He nodded, recalling his father's long-ago advice. "Justice should never be easy. You should feel the weight of the blade every time." "I only hope it deters others," he said quietly. "We cannot become savage in our thirst for vengeance. Walder Frey's crimes do not excuse our own." The Great John cleared his throat, letting out a heavy sigh. "I'll see the body disposed of. The stable boy is shaken, but a kind word from you might ease him. He's by the stables, I believe, with a couple of my men." Robb ran a hand over his mouth, feeling a tremor of weariness. "Thank you, my lord. I'll go." He found the stable boy, a lad no older than 12, crouched by a water barrel, tears staining his dirt-smudged cheeks. A small bandage wrapped around his neck, where the blade had nicked him. Two stark men stood nearby, looking at the boy with uncertain compassion. When Robb approached, the men moved aside, bowing their heads in respect. Robb knelt, ignoring the protest in his shoulder. Gray wind sat behind him, tail curled around his legs. The boy flinched at the direwolf's presence, eyes darting nervously. "Easy," Robb said, voice gentle. "He won't harm you." The boy stared with wide eyes. "I only did what I was told. Feed the horses." "I never lifted a hand in the fighting," he whispered. Robb believed him. "What's your name?" "Tregar. Tregar Frey. But my father is just a stableman, not a lord. He only has the Frey name because—" He trailed off, uncertain how to explain his family's complicated ties. Robb offered a small, kind smile. "There are many branches to that tree. I understand. Listen, Tregar, you're no prisoner here. We'll keep you safe as long as you don't take arms against us. That man who threatened you, he won't trouble you anymore." The boy swallowed, eyes flitting to Robb's sword. You killed him?" Robb exhaled, nodding once. "He broke our code. Harming the innocent is not allowed." no matter the cause. I'd rather no more blood be shed. Nah. Tregar's lips trembled. He gave a tiny nod and turned his gaze aside. Some part of him might have difficulty reconciling that a man had just been executed on his behalf. Robb felt no triumph in it. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder briefly, then rose to leave. "Go on with your tasks if you wish, or stay in the keep where it's safer," Robb said quietly. "We won't force you." A simple bow of the head was all Tregar managed. Robb left him there, guarded by the two Stark soldiers. As he walked away, a wave of fatigue pressed down again. The day seemed endless, and it was only midday. Above, the clouds thickened, hinting at possible rain. The wind swept a chill through the courtyard, a reminder that autumn's end neared. Winter was coming, as the old word said, and the war raged on. He glanced up to see Edmure returning from the sept, Rosalind at his side. Rosalind's eyes were puffy, as though she'd been crying. She wore a plain gray cloak, clasped hastily at her neck. Edmure supported her gently, his own face lined with worry. Robb approached them, mindful that Rosalind might be reeling from the day's events. "My lord," she whispered, curtsying slightly. "I heard some commotion in the courtyard." Robb wasn't sure how much she'd heard. "A man tried to kill a stable boy out of spite," he said plainly. "He's been dealt with. How fare you, my lady?" She blinked, swallowing a sob. "I prayed for my father's soul, but the seven are silent. How can they speak through so much blood?" Her eyes shone with tears. "Edmure says the old ways of guest right are older than the seven. I wonder if the gods themselves turned away when father plotted. That monstrous betrayal." "Nah." Edmure stroked her arm. "Hush, Rosalind. Let the gods judge, Walder. You did what you could to protect me, and for that, I'm grateful." Her gaze flitted to Robb. "I wish to help. I know it seems worthless now, but if I can do anything more to keep people safe, I will. I'll show you every hidden nook in this fortress, every lock, every storeroom." Robb appreciated her sincerity. "We welcome your aid. I'd ask you to help us identify Frey kin who are truly innocent, or at least not complicit. Some must have had no knowledge of the plot. If we can separate them from the fanatics, it might ease tensions." "Badminton, Xiao." She nodded, though the burden weighed on her. "I'll do my best, though I know only part of the family well. My father kept so many secrets. I need only what you can give," Robb assured her. "Thank you." A raindrop spattered on Rosalind's cloak, followed by another. Within moments, a light drizzle fell, turning the courtyard's dust into mud. Men muttered and pulled up hoods or sought shelter under overhangs. Robb frowned at the sky, motioning for Edmure and Rosalind to follow him inside. "Let's not stand in the rain," he said, guiding them back toward the keep's corridors. Inside, they paused under a torchlit alcove, water dripping from their cloaks. Rosalind shivered slightly, and Edmure removed his own cloak to wrap it around her shoulders. Robb noticed how her hands shook as she clutched the fabric. She had endured terror and heartbreak, losing all illusions about her father's honor. The memory of that betrayal haunted everyone. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, until Edmure cleared his throat. "Would you have me speak to the remaining Frey lords or ladies who surrendered? If I present myself as a Tully and as Rosalind's husband, perhaps I can coax them to accept reason." Robb considered that. "It might help. They know you're at least partly tied to their house by marriage. That connection might grant them a semblance of trust. If you can identify those willing to parley, do so. But you must keep your guard. Some might pretend to parley only to strike when you least expect." Edmure's gaze hardened. "I'll be cautious." "Yes," Rosalind whispered, looking at Edmure with concern. "My father taught us all how to twist words. Don't assume a Frey's courtesy means submission." Edmure set his jaw. "I know, but we cannot simply lock the entire clan in the dungeons. We have to move past this, or we'll drown in more blood." Robb agreed. "Speak with them. Let me know if any show genuine remorse or willingness to cooperate. The rest will remain under watch. Meanwhile, I'll plan our next steps for the war." He paused, glancing at Rosalind. "Perhaps tomorrow we'll do another thorough sweep of the keep. You could guide a squad of my men, show them any lesser-known corners. Neon? And she managed a stiff nod. I will. Footsteps echoed from behind them, and they turned to see the Great John arriving, shaking raindrops from his wide shoulders. Your Grace, he rumbled. We've a small matter. A messenger from House Mallister arrived at the gates, seeking audience. Claims he comes with tidings from Seaguard about Ironborn movements. Robb perked up. Mallister? That's unexpected. Did they say anything of the Lannisters? The Great John shrugged. He only said it was urgent news. We let him inside. He's waiting in the main hall, under guard. Minham. Robb swept a hand through his damp hair. Very well. Let's see what he has to say. You two, he glanced at Edmure and Rosalind. Take caution in your dealings with the Freys. I'll join you once I'm done with this messenger. Edmure gave a quick nod. Rosalind attempted a wan smile before they separated. The Great John led Robb and Caitlin back toward the Great Hall. Rain pattered against the high windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing as though the castle itself groaned. The flickering torchlight revealed new patches of clean stone where men had scrubbed away bloodstains, though a few dark smears remained, stubborn reminders of betrayal. Inside, the Great Hall held fewer bodies now. They had removed most of the fallen, leaving only scraps of broken wood and upended furniture pushed aside. At the center, a traveling cloak dripped rainwater onto the floor, worn by a lanky man with streaks of gray in his beard. He stood quietly, hands folded, flanked by two stark guards. He must have been in his mid-40s, with tired eyes that glanced nervously about. Upon seeing Robb approach, he inclined his head in deference. Your Grace, the man began, voice raspy from the cold. I am Lyle Varner, sworn to House Mallister of Seaguard. Robb motioned for the guards to step back slightly. Speak freely, Sir Lyle. What brings you to the twins in these troubled times? The man lowered his hood, revealing damp, thinning hair. I've come on my lord's behalf, though not as an official envoy. More a messenger, you might say. My lord hears many rumors that Walder Frey turned on you, and that you overcame him? He eyed the hall warily, as though half expecting crossbows to be aimed at his head. We heard you might be dead, or captured, or victorious, depending on who tells the tale. My lord hoped to find out the truth. Robb spread his hands. As you see, I stand alive. Lord Walder's plot failed. We hold the twins. Lord Walder himself sits in the dungeon. A flicker of relief crossed Sir Lyle's features. Then the realm's rumors are true. The Red Wedding was thwarted. The Mallisters stand with House Tully and House Stark, if you'll have us. But there is more ill news. The Ironborn raid along the coast, and I fear some of their longships creep closer to Seaguard again. My lord needs assurance that the king in the north still wages this war in earnest. We can't repel both Ironborn and Lannisters alone. Ineboa. Caitlin stepped forward, brow creased. So the Ironborn remain a menace. They burned Winterfell once, now they harry our allies? Sir Lyle nodded grimly. Not in overwhelming force, but enough to keep us tied up. If we call away men to aid you, the Ironborn might strike Seaguard itself. My lord begs for some sign of your intentions. Will you lead your army south to face Tywin, or head north to drive out the Greyjoys? Where do we stand? Mar. Robb exchanged a glance with Caitlin. This was the crux of their predicament. I intend to face Tywin's threat, he said carefully. But I cannot ignore the Ironborn if they escalate raids. My men are spread thin, and the twins require a garrison. I ask Lord Mallister to hold fast for now. If I can secure more Riverlords to guard these lands, I'll do what I can to help drive the Ironborn back. Nahtsin. Sir Lyle's mouth pressed into a thin line. I'll relay your words, but my lord may question whether you can truly spare men. He hears talk that the Lannisters mass near Harrenhal. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain gripped Robb. We have rumors of Tywin's movement as well. Until I have confirmed intelligence, I cannot commit my entire force in one direction. Tell your lord that we'll soon have reinforcements from the Tully banners, if they remain loyal. Together, we can keep the Ironborn at bay while I address the Lannisters. Sir Lyle inclined his head once more. I'll ride back with your message then, though traveling is perilous these days. Bandits roam the roads, and Frey outriders might be scattered in the fields. Robb considered. We'll provide you an escort, 10 men perhaps. That should see you safely past the immediate danger. Return swiftly to Seaguard. Let Lord Mallister know the king in the north stands, and that we will move on Tywin as soon as we have the means. Thank you, Sir Lyle murmured. I'll leave as soon as the rain eases. Robb gestured for the guards to show him to a side room where he could rest and eat. Once the messenger was gone, Robb turned to Catelyn. Voice low. The Ironborn. Another front we can't ignore. She touched his arm gently. Perhaps we can negotiate with them. Offer some arrangement if they withdraw from the coast. His face hardened. The Greyjoys want crowns of their own. I doubt they'll yield easily. They sacked Winterfell. Nearly killed my brothers. No, I'd not trust a peace with them unless they're truly pressed. She sighed, eyes distant. We're caught between multiple fires. Lannister on one side, Ironborn on another, and now the remnants of Frey forces scattered about, all while we hold the twins with a battered army. Robb exhaled, forcing composure. We have to focus on Tywin first. He's the bigger threat. If we defeat him, or at least check his advance, perhaps the Greyjoys will lose their impetus. She tilted her head. And if Tywin crushes us, the Ironborn run rampant. The Riverlands would be torn apart from both directions. He didn't answer right away, gazing at the whetstones underfoot. The hush of rain against the hall's roof filled the silence. Finally, he looked at her. We have no perfect options, Mother. We stand or fall by forging alliances quickly. That's why the Blackfish must rally the Riverlords. We need Mallister, Bracken, Blackwood, Derry, whoever remains loyal. Then we push back Tywin. The Great John, who had lingered by the dais, stomped over, water dripping from his beard. Your Grace, if it's a fight we need, my men are ready. Another 1,000 or so remain able to ride. We'd best not tarry too long. The men grow restless behind these walls. Don't. Robb gripped the Great John's forearm. I know. Soon, I promise. But first, we must make sure the twins doesn't fall the moment we march out. We'll set a garrison, pick men we trust to hold it. Then the rest of us can move on. If the gods are good, the Blackfish will bring more swords. A stormy look crossed the Great John's face, but he dipped his head. I will do it. Let's just pray Tywin doesn't get wind of this and strike first. Robb had no illusions. Tywin Lannister had eyes and ears everywhere. Still, they would have to plan swiftly, trusting that holding the twins might provide an advantage the Lannisters wouldn't expect. He dismissed the Great John to coordinate the escort for Sir Lyle, and the big man left, hollering for his captains. Alone with Catelyn near the dais, Robb felt the day's burdens accumulate in his bones. A wave of fatigue crashed over him. His newly bandaged shoulder throbbed, and the memory of that execution still clung to his mind. I need rest soon, he murmured. But there is always more to do. She nodded in understanding, running a hand gently down his arm. Take an hour if you can. You'll do no one any favors if you collapse. Edmure and Rosalind can handle the basic parley with the Freys. His resolve wavered, but reason prevailed. All right, he said softly. An hour of rest, then we press on. They climbed a short flight of stairs to a modest solar that had once belonged to a lesser Frey scion. Stark soldiers guarded the door, letting Robb and Catelyn enter unchallenged. Within, a crackling hearth provided warmth. The tapestries tattered but serviceable, depicting rolling river scenes. Heavy drapes over the window kept out the worst of the rain's chill. A single cot lay against the wall. Robb sank onto it, boots still on, leaning back with a groan of weariness. Catelyn paced the room, glancing at him. I remain close by, see that no one disturbs you unless it's urgent. He reached out, catching her hand. Mother, you should rest as well. She forced a thin smile. Soon, she said. I'll check on the men's morale, gather reports, and then rest. One of us must remain vigilant. Died Hintar. Reluctantly, he released her hand, eyes drifting shut. Just an hour, he repeated. She squeezed his fingers gently, then slipped from the room. Grey Wind, sensing Robb's exhaustion, padded to the hearth and curled up, tail swishing across the floor. The wolf's presence soothed Robb. He let the warmth of the fire lull him, even as the rain tapped against the shutters in a discordant lullaby. His mind lingered on the day's grim tasks. The frightened Frey women, the stable boy, the messenger from Seaguard, the execution that weighed on his heart. He was king in the north by necessity, not by choice, and these choices left stains no washing could remove. Exhaustion won out. He drifted into a shallow sleep, haunted by fleeting images of crossbow bolts, the memory of Walder Frey's mocking face behind iron bars, and the echo of his father's voice whispering about duty, justice, and honor. The line between dream and memory blurred. Time slipped by in uncertain fragments. He woke to the sound of thunder. Sitting up, he realized more than an hour might have passed. The fire's logs had burned low, the chamber's light had dimmed. Grey Wind blinked at him, lifting his massive head, ears pricked. Outside, the storm had grown fiercer, the wind howling around the fortress' high walls. A dull gloom pervaded the space. He massaged the stiff muscles of his neck, listening. Somewhere in the corridor beyond, footsteps hurried past. Muffled voices rose and fell. Tension coiled in Robb's belly. He strapped on his sword belt, ignoring the dull ache in his shoulder, and left the solar. Grey Wind shadowed him, muzzle lifted to the air as if sensing fresh anxiety. In the corridor, a stark guard approached, face drawn. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption. We've word from the men on the southern wall, riders sighted in the distance. Could be Freys or bandits or Lannister scouts. Hard to say in this weather, but they're approaching from the main road." Robb felt his pulse quicken. How many? Hard to get an exact count. Perhaps a dozen, perhaps more. The rain shrouds them. The guard's fingers twitched on the spear shaft. "Should we prepare for a fight?" Robb nodded sharply. "Rally the archers. Close the gates. I'll see for myself from the wall. If they bring a parley flag, we'll hear them out. Otherwise, we hold them at arrow's length." "Mander one." The guard hurried away to carry out the commands. Robb moved swiftly through the keep, boots echoing on the stone, Grey Wind at his side. The sound of distant thunder rumbled again, a fitting backdrop to the sense of imminent confrontation. He emerged into the courtyard, where men scurried to man positions along the battlements. Torches guttered in the gusting wind and rain. He glimpsed the Grey John bellowing orders from the top of the steps, telling crossbowmen to form up behind the parapets. Caitlin stood beside him, hood drawn, her hair whipped by the storm. Robb joined them, climbing the slick stairs onto the ramparts. The vantage there afforded a partial view of the southern approach, a winding road that vanished into a haze of rain. Through the gloom, torchlight flickered from a cluster of moving shapes. Riders in formation. Lightning flashed, revealing them more clearly for a heartbeat. Robb counted at least 12, perhaps 15, possibly more behind the first rank. Their banners were muddled in the storm, but he thought he saw a shape that was not a wolf, nor a trout, nor the Frey towers. Could it be the Lion of House Lannister? A hush spread among the men on the wall. Bowstrings creaked, and crossbow bolts were loaded. The Greychin spat over the side, rainwater streaming down his brow. "If it's Lannisters, we'll fill them with arrows from here to King's Landing." Robb clenched his jaw. "Steady. Let's see if they bear a banner of truce." The riders slowed as they neared the foot of the fortress, well within bowshot. A figure moved to the front, waving a torch in the downpour. Another lightning flash illuminated a banner. A gold lion on crimson cloth, half soaked and plastered to the pole by the rain. A murmur ran through Robb's men. The Lannisters had come, if only in small number. A voice amplified by the echo of the fortress walls shouted up from below. "We come seeking parley with the king in the north. We bear no ill will if you'll hear our message." Robb's heart pounded. Tywin Lannister himself would not appear with so few men, not if he suspected the twins had fallen. This was more likely a scout or an envoy, sent to confirm the rumors. He motioned to the Grey John, who roared, "Show us your banner of peace then, if your talk is true." A smaller flag appeared, white in the torchlight, though grayed by the wet. They raised it shakily, letting the wind catch it. The men on the walls muttered, uncertain. Robb grit his teeth. A Lannister envoy under a peace banner. Walder Frey might have taught them how worthless such things could be. But perhaps refusing them would cost an opportunity to glean Tywin's intentions. He shouted down, remain where you are, and keep your hands visible. You may approach the main gate under guard. Any false move, and my archers will cut you down. The envoy hesitated, then gestured for his men to hold. Slowly, they advanced. A dozen riders at most, while the rest hovered further back, presumably as backup or to watch for treachery. The Great John nodded to the men at the gatehouse. They unbarred the gates partway, raising the portcullis just enough to allow riders single-file entry. Archers stood by, arrows nocked. If the Lannisters tried any ruse, they'd be pincushioned before crossing the threshold. Robb and Catelyn descended to the courtyard, flanked by Grey Wind and a host of stern-faced Northmen. The rain dripped steadily from the eaves, pattering on the muddy ground. Torches sputtered, casting flickers of orange across the faces of anxious soldiers. The Lannister party entered, their mounts snorting in the wet gloom. Leading them was a man in partial plate armor, a cloak pinned at his left shoulder. His face was pale and sharp-featured, his hair a dull brown. Behind him rode a young squire clinging to the standard pole. They halted in the courtyard, water sloshing around the horses' hooves. Robb stepped forward, hand resting on his sword hilt, Grey Wind bristling at his side. You claim to bear a message? The Lannister envoy inclined his head with stiff politeness. I am Sir Russ Vywell, sworn sword to Lord Tywin Lannister. I come under a flag of truce to discover if King Robb Stark still lives, and if so, whether he will consider terms to end this war. Murmurs rippled among Robb's men. The Great John let out a scoffing laugh. Robb forced calm, though anger stirred within. Sir Russ, he said, I live, as you see. Your allies the Freys saw to that when their treachery failed. So Tywin seeks terms, does he? What terms would the man who had my father killed offer me now? Sir Russ tried to appear dignified, though he looked half drowned by the downpour. Lord Tywin regrets the violent extremes this war has reached. He proposes a settlement that ensures peace in the Riverlands and acknowledges Lannister authority. In exchange, you may keep certain northern holdings, under the crown's suzerainty, of course. A ripple of indignation spread. Men muttered curses. Catelyn's face twisted in disgust. Robb barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. You talk of peace, and yet Tywin orchestrated my father's unjust trial, allied with Walder Frey, and all but tried to murder me under guest right. You say we should kneel for scraps of mercy. This is Tywin's offer? The envoy cleared his throat. The details are open to negotiation. My lord only instructed me to confirm you still lived and to offer preliminary overtures. He believes more bloodshed would serve no one. The crown demands your submission, but terms can be more lenient if you yield. Continue the war, and the entire North may pay a higher price. Robb's fury churned. He gripped his sword, resisting the urge to draw it. Grey Wind bared teeth, snarling at the horses, which stamped nervously. Your lord brought plenty of bloodshed already, Robb growled. Tell Tywin that the king in the north does not yield to a butcher. If he wants me, let him march north himself. We hold the twins, and we will not cower beneath a lion's roar. Sir Russ shifted uncomfortably in the saddle, rain dripping from his chin. Then you refuse even to parley about the future? Robb's eyes blazed. I'll parley if Tywin meets me on fair ground, but I will never accept him as my rightful overlord. Not after my father's head was put on a spike in King's Landing. Not after the Red Wedding's attempted slaughter. Go and tell your lord that if he wants the north, he'll have to kill us all. Go and tell your lord he'll have to kill us all. A hush followed, broken only by the hiss of rainfall. The Lannister envoy studied Robb, then the men around him. The banners with direwolves, the archers perched under eaves, arrows aimed. He must have realized the gravity of the situation. Very well. he said at last. "I shall carry your message back. I fear you doom yourselves to ruin. Lord Tywin's armies are vast. He will not rest until every rebel kneels." Robb gave no answer, simply staring the man down. Finally, Sir Russ inclined his head again, signaled his retinue, and turned his horse. The gates were opened just enough to let them depart. Archers tracked their every move until they disappeared into the stormy darkness. A tense silence lingered, punctuated by thunder. Catelyn finally spoke. "So, Tywin knows you live, and that you hold the twins. He tests your resolve." The Greyjohn cursed under his breath. "Let him try something. We'll give him the same welcome we gave Walder's crossbowmen." But Robb felt none of the Greyjohn's grim satisfaction. Tywin would not be as easily undone as Walder. The Red Wedding's failure might only provoke the Lion to fiercer wrath. "We must prepare," he said aloud. "Reinforce every gate, every wall. If Tywin is uncertain of our strength, he might try to test us with raids before an all-out assault. We must remain vigilant." Men nodded, dispersing to their tasks. Robb stood in the rain, breathing hard, chest tight with the weight of what lay ahead. The war had not ended, far from it. They had only a precarious foothold in a land filled with enemies. Yet still, he lived, and his banners flew above the twins. Perhaps that would inspire the River Lords to rally. Perhaps the realm would see a glimmer of hope in the Wolf King's defiance. He turned to the Greyjohn, voice subdued. "Station watchers with horns on the towers. If Tywin's men approach again, we'll know in time to meet them at the walls. We hold the crossing, and will make them pay dearly if they dare come." As thunder rattled the sky, Robb led Catelyn back toward the keep, gray wind padding through rivulets of water. Neither mother nor son spoke, for the enormity of the conflict weighed upon them. Walder Frey was locked away below, a testament to how cunning might fail when pitted against fate and the fierce loyalty of the North. But Tywin Lannister remained a far more formidable adversary, cunning and ruthless in equal measure, commanding armies beyond the scale of what Walder could have mustered. In the flickering torchlight of the corridors, Robb paused and touched Catelyn's hand. "We must not lose heart," he said quietly. "We overcame the worst betrayal imaginable here. Perhaps that counts for something." She squeezed his fingers gently, her eyes shining with a tempered resolve. "We will keep fighting, Robb. For Ned's memory, for the North, for all we hold dear." "Man, so." His grip tightened on her hand before he released it. Together, they continued into the depths of the fortress, carrying the burden of leadership through dripping halls and unsettled hearts. Outside, the storm raged, as though the sky itself threatened to wash the entire castle into the rushing river below. But within those walls, the Northmen and the Tully banners held fast, determined to defy the Lion's roar, no matter the cost. The Red Wedding had failed, and House Stark still stood, battle-scarred, weary but unbroken. And so the war ground on, a relentless tide that only the gods could know how it would end.